Chapter 1071, Crossing Palms. Zhongxian nodded. If I am not mistaken, the name of your palm art is Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm. The sculptor widened his eyes in astonishment. You know the name of the palm art? He had only recorded the Zhenqi circulation pathway of the palm art in the form of figures on the stone tablets. Nowhere on the stone tablets was the name of the palm art stated. Just where in the world did that fellow learn of the name? This. Zhongxian was stunned for a moment before his eyebrows shot up. It suddenly dawned on him as well that the name of the palm art was not stated anywhere on the stone tablets. Even though he had practiced the battle technique, he would only know that it was a palm art and not what palm art it was. Elder, I happen to have read some of your records and learned that you have a powerful palm art named Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm, which has been lost with time. While practicing the palm art recorded on the stone tablets, I realized that it is very similar to the Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm, so I deduced that this palm art might be it, Zhongxian replied. One thing was for sure, he could not reveal the details concerning the Library of Heaven's Path. Whether the other party believed him or not, that was not his concern anyway. The sculptor was stunned. You have read some of my records. You did not seem to have read my records when I tried to take you in as my student back in the unbounded world though. Nevertheless, he knew that there was no point pursuing this matter. Thus, the sculptor turned to Zhongxian once more and asked, You said that you not only deciphered the palm art, you have even grasped it as well, correct? Yes. Zhongxian nodded. The sculptor shook his head. You would have cleared the trial just by deciphering the palm art. But to practice it as well. Reckless. You are really too reckless. He was the one who had created the palm art, so he knew full well how difficult it was to practice the technique. Even the strongest among their expedition group, the Saint Dan Pinnacle Master Teacher, would not have sufficient Zhenqi to practice the technique. For a nascent saint to try it out, wasn't he just asking for trouble? This fist art has reached Saint Intermediate tier, and it would be difficult for even Saint Dan experts to master the technique. Those whose cultivation don't meet the mark will only injure themselves by practicing it. Back when I first created the technique, it took an entire year and 3 months just to achieve novice mastery, 3 years to reach initiate, and minor accomplishment, nearly 8 years. Of my disciples, even the most talented of them took 40 years in order to reach minor accomplishment, the sculptor said as he reminisced about the past. It had not been easy even for him, the creator of the fist art, to master it. Just reaching minor accomplishment had taken him 12 whole years. His students had fared much worse than him, such that they were not even worth mentioning. Just from that alone, it could be seen how difficult it was to learn the Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm. You must have given up after realizing that it will be extremely difficult for you to grasp the technique with your current cultivation, right? That's the right way to go. Without my guidance, there is a good chance that you might end up cultivating it incorrectly, and that could lead to disastrous consequences. Before he could finish his words, the young man before him scratched his head in embarrassment and said, while practicing the technique earlier, I think that I accidentally reached minor accomplishment. You accidentally reached minor accomplishment. The sculpture shook wildly, and it nearly burst apart on the spot. It was just a moment ago that he said that he, despite being the creator of the palm art, took 12 years to reach minor accomplishment. How long had it been since the young man before him started practicing it? Even assuming that the other party had deciphered the stone tablets as soon as he arrived, he would still only have had around 6 hours to practice the Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow art. And yet, minor accomplishment. Was he for real? Indeed. To be honest with you, your Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm is indeed very strong, but it's a pity that it simply has too many flaws. Zhongxian sighed deeply. It's really distressing for me to practice a technique like this. You. As soon as the sculptor heard those words, he nearly fainted from rage. Back in the unbounded world, that fellow directed those words to another one of his soul fragments, and eventually, that fragmented soul ended up losing its composure and dissipated. And now, he was off again. Just what did I do to offend you? If it's so distressing for you to practice my technique, why the heck did you cultivate it to minor accomplishment? You said that you cultivated it to minor accomplishment. Frowning, the sculptor glanced at Zhongxian and said, It is possible for me to gauge if you have learned my palm art correctly and how deep your mastery of it is through the might you exert with it. How about this? I'll suppress my cultivation to nascent saint and execute my heavenly demon great sorrow palm at minor accomplishment mastery, and as long as you can withstand my attack, I will acknowledge that you have indeed grasped the essence of my palm art. There was probably no one who could remain calm after having his capabilities doubted by a mere nascent saint cultivator multiple times. It was not the first time that the young man before him had said such words. Thus, ancient sage Chiu Wu decided to teach the other party a lesson so as to make him learn that there was a greater world beyond the world he saw. Otherwise, with such a complacent attitude, the other party would not go far in life, and that would truly be a huge loss to mankind. Hearing that the other party intended to cross palms with him, Zhongxian was stunned for a moment. You are able to execute battle techniques despite being a sculptor? Of course. I might only be a sculptor at the moment, but through my fragmented soul, I am still able to easily utilize strength comparable to a nascent saint, the sculptor replied before raising his palm. An indomitable aura immediately permeated the area, exerting an incredible pressure on all life forms standing in the vicinity. Ancient sage Chiu Wu was already a renowned top-notch expert in the master-teacher continent before he joined Kong Shi's ranks. He was known to be a peerless existence even among those who had reached the same height in their cultivation as him. Even if ancient sage Chiu Wu suppresses his cultivation to nascent saint, there's no way Principal Zhong will be able to take his palm, that's a definite. After all, the palm art was created by ancient sage Chiu Wu, and he has practiced it for innumerable years. On the other hand, Principal Zhong has barely had 6 hours to grasp the technique. Within such a short period of time, no matter how talented he may be, how much could he possibly have comprehended? Indeed, there is simply too huge a difference between the both of them. Principal Zhong doesn't stand a chance. Upon seeing this sight, Wu Shi and the others shook their heads. In their view, there was no way Zhongxian stood a chance against ancient sage Chiu Wu. One had barely cultivated the technique for 6 hours whereas the other had years of experience. Not to mention, ancient sage Chiu Wu was one of the strongest experts in the continent. Even with his cultivation suppressed to nascent saint as well, it was impossible for Zhongxian to be able to match him. Seeing how adamant the other party was on the matter, Zhongxian could only relent with a nod. All right then. To be honest, even though he had said that he had practiced the palm art, he had not had an opportunity to execute the technique yet. All he had done was drive his zhenqi through the circulation pathway as stated in the palm art manual. This spar would serve as a good opportunity for him to gauge the strength harnessed within the heavenly demon great sorrow art. If it was still decently powerful, he could consider using it in future battles. Let's begin then, the sculptor said as he thrust his palm forward with overwhelming momentum. Boom! A devastating aura that was reminiscent of innumerable heavenly demons descending upon the lands pervaded the surroundings. It exerted a crushing pressure not only on one's physical body but on one's soul as well. The prowess of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm did not just lie in its physical might but its ability to assault souls and primordial spirit as well. This was precisely why it was extremely well known back in the ancient era despite only being a saint intermediate tier battle technique. How strong! Despite standing such a long distance away. Even though the attack isn't directed toward me, my body still instinctively stiffened in fear, rendering me incapable of retaliating at all, as expected of a battle technique created by ancient sage Chiu Wu. If I could master it, my fighting prowess would surely be enhanced by at least twofold. This palm art requires the user to infuse their soul energy into the palm strike as well in order to bring forth the immense might it harnesses. It won't be easy to grasp it. Feeling the might of the palm art, Wu Shi and the others found their bodies stiffening uncontrollably, and their faces paled in astonishment and fear. It was simply too powerful. To be honest, the sculpture's movements were not fast, and there was not anything particularly profound about it either. Yet, it harnessed a might that left one feeling deeply helpless before it, both physically and mentally. This was a sensation that none of the battle techniques they had cultivated could ever hope to evoke in their opponents. Truly terrifying. No wonder ancient sage Chiu Wu said that the palm art won't be easy to practice. I can now see why. I wonder how deep a mastery Principal Zhong has achieved in the technique, Wuxia said. The heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm had already transcended the level of being a mere maneuver involving the use of one's palms. In order to execute the technique, one's spirit, psyche, and mind had to be perfectly aligned with one's movements. Without years of training, it would be impossible to pull it off. As talented as Principal Zhong was, he was simply too young. The experience he could have accrued would inevitably be terribly limited. As such, it was truly unlikely that he would be able to grasp the very essence of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow art. The reason most cultivators chose to journey through the world to experience the many facets of life, be it joy, anger, sorrow, or envy, was to temper their state of mind, making it more wholesome and resilient. There were also many cultivation techniques and battle techniques that were built upon such experiences, and without personally going through those experiences, it would be difficult for one to grasp its essence. With such thoughts in mind, Wuxia could not help but turn his gaze toward the young man in question, only to see the young man standing calmly with his hands behind his back, not in a rush to prepare his defense. He glanced at the sky at a 45-degree angle. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking about, but unspeakable sorrow was reflected in the depths of his eyes. Perhaps his lover had left him behind, or maybe his kin or a close friend had passed away before his eyes, but in that moment, he exuded a forlorn aura that felt as if the whole world had abandoned him. Wuxia narrowed his eyes before exclaiming in shock. That is, a terpsichorean art? It was just a simple posture, but it emanated deep sorrow that spectators could vividly feel with their entire existence. This was no longer just a state of mind but a technique involving the soul as well. Terpsichorean art? I thought that terpsichorean arts utilize dance in order to assault one's opponents. Feng Zun asked in confusion. In his view, terpsichore was an occupation that put others in a trance through their resplendent clothes and graceful movements. Due to the nature of the occupation, it was usually practiced only by females. How could Principal Zhong be a terpsichore as well? Not to mention, even if he was a terpsichore, all he was doing was standing still in his plain and unspectacular master-teacher robe. How could something like that be considered a terpsichorean art? It's true that most terpsichores utilize dance as a medium to launch soul attacks against their opponents. However, it's said that if one achieves a deep mastery in terpsichorean arts, one will be able to put others into a trance even with the simplest of gestures. Even though Principal Zhong isn't moving, I'm certain you can feel your soul resonating with his state of mind. At this point, Wuxia raised his finger and pointed. Look at them. Feng Zun turned his gaze over and saw that the combat masters behind him had their emotions deeply moved by Zhongxian, and tears were flowing uncontrollably down their faces. This. Feng Zun narrowed his eyes in shock. He thought that it was already an amazing feat for Zhongxian to possess a deep understanding of formations and wield strength comparable to his. Who would have thought that he possessed such fearsome means to deal with the soul as well? Even though the combat masters behind him only possessed cultivations of Saint 1 Dan and Saint 2 Dan, they were all experts who were capable of easily rivaling opponents far stronger than them, so it would be a huge mistake to measure them solely based on their cultivation realms. Furthermore, they had also undergone training to temper their souls and fend off soul attacks. Yet, with just a glance, they had all succumbed to Zhongxian's terpsichorean art, completely helpless to retaliate. In that moment, Feng Zun felt his goosebumps rising all over his skin. Look, it's starting. Amid his shock, Wuxia suddenly exclaimed loudly, jolting him back from his daze. He hurriedly turned his gaze over and saw Principal Zhong raising his palm lightly to face the sculpture's strike squarely. His movements could not have been considered fast, and there was nothing elegant or impressive about them either. It resembled nothing but a simple push, and yet, it left the crowd feeling as if they were standing atop a small boat amid a violent storm in the ocean. In that instant, Zhongxian seemed to have morphed into a gigantic heavenly demon, and his presence crushed their souls so tightly that none of them could even gather the slightest courage to stand against him. Noticing the abrupt change in the young man's disposition, the sculpture's initial calm expression turned slightly grave. Frowning deeply, he infused more strength into his palm strike. Peng! The two palms finally collided with one another, and an incredible shockwave surged into the surroundings. Su! Before the sculptor could even process what was going on, he was sent flying into a stone tablet and shattered into pieces. Everyone was dumbfounded. This. The same cultivation realm, the same palm strike, and the same level of mastery, and Principal Zhong was still able to defeat ancient sage Qiu Wu in a single strike? Chapter 1072. Ancient sage Qiu Wu dissipates from shock. Again. None of them had doubted that Principal Zhong was going to be sent flying from ancient sage Qiu Wu's palm strike, but the situation ended up being the complete reverse. The expert who had stood beside Kongshe for many years ended up being instantly destroyed instead. More importantly, the fellow who had instantly destroyed him had done it using his palm art after practicing it for barely 6 hours. How in the world can I ever match up with that monster? Feng Zun, whose hair had been devastated by the shockwave, was on the verge of tears. Even though he had lost to Zhongxian the previous time around, he had been able to accept his loss calmly because he thought that as long as he cultivated diligently after returning to the Combat Master Hall, he would eventually be able to return the favor and cleanse himself of the humiliation. However, after witnessing the insane might that Zhongxian was able to exert on a whim, he should just abandon all hopes of that then and there. Otherwise, he would only be treading down a path where he would suffer blow after blow until insanity finally consumed him. Are you sure that you have only reached a mastery of minor accomplishment? Just like the shocked crowd, the sculpture's head rose from its destroyed remains and stared at Zhongxian, flabbergasted. The heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm was a technique that he had created after long years of studying and experimentation, and he thought that no one would be able to top him in it. Yet, he was still sent flying so easily. How could the might wielded by the other party's attack be so much greater than his? It is only at minor accomplishment. Zhongxian had never used the palm art before, so he had not thought that it would be so powerful either. If he had known earlier, he would have made sure to hold back so that he did not destroy the other party's body. He could not help but feel a little embarrassed. There were too many flaws in the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm previously, so I altered it slightly. I really did not think that it would be so powerful. My sincere apologies. The sculptor widened his eyes in shock. Altered? You altered my palm art? In just 6 short hours, not only did that fellow decipher the battle technique he had left behind and practice it to a mastery of minor accomplishment, he even thought that it was too weak and modified it. Man, you are really heading for the stars. Your heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm is a decent palm art indeed, wielding considerable strength. However, it is simply riddled with too many flaws. There are exactly 27 of them. Due to the limitations of my shallow knowledge, I was only able to resolve 18 of them, so there are still 9 remaining, which I can't find a solution to at the moment. Zhongxian shook his head and sighed deeply. If he had sufficient palm art manuals at hand, he never would have practiced such a flawed palm art. Just thinking about it was sufficient to leave him deeply frustrated. Voila! The sculptor was in the midst of regathering his shattered body when he heard those words, and he shook intensely, nearly shattering once more. Shallow knowledge. And furthermore, what is with that frustrated look on your face? Will you die if you stop showing off for a while? It is a fist art I created, and even I was unable to correct it any further. With just a look, you were able to resolve 2/3 of the remaining flaws, and you call that having shallow knowledge? If that's considered as shallow, should I just end my life right here and right now? It is a Saint intermediate tier battle technique, and you actually feel frustrated from practicing it. I am the one who should be frustrated. Due to the intense fluctuations in his state of mind, more and more cracks began appearing on the regathering sculpture. He had left behind his ancient domain to find himself an outstanding student to pass down his heritage so as to return glory and honor to his lineage. Who would have thought that instead of displaying his awe-inspiring might as an esteemed elder, he ended up suffering blow after blow instead? Suppressing his vexed emotions, the sculptor asked, "Which 18 flaws did you alter?" Given that they were at the same cultivation realm using the same palm art with the same level of mastery, the fact that the might harnessed by the other party's palm was far greater than his went to show that the other party had successfully improved his palm art. As the one who had painstakingly created the technique, it was natural that he wanted to know what mistakes his palm art had. You wish to know? I can teach you. Zhongxian replied with a smile. Catcher. A huge crack appeared on the sculpture, and ancient sage Qiu Wu felt a sharp pain assaulting its chest. There's no need for it. As much as he wanted to know where he had gone wrong, he did not think that he could take it if the other party were to ask him to acknowledge him as his teacher once more. There's no need to stand on ceremony. It's actually quite simple. The first flaw is that when one's zhenqi is directed toward the spiritual sea. Zhongxian began explaining the flaws. As he did not have sufficient advanced movement arts to fuse together with the boundless Voyager, he only knew of its flaws and not how they should be resolved. As such, he was unable to respond to the other party's query back then. However, for the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm, he already had the solutions for those 18 flaws, so it was not a big deal for him to recite them to the other party. Catcher, catcher. Hearing those words, more and more cracks appeared on the sculpture. Too overwhelmed with shock, it seemed to be at the limits of its endurance. Ancient sage Qiu Wu had only left a sliver of his soul in the ancient domain. Furthermore, with the passing of innumerable years, his fragmented soul had already grown incredibly weak and unstable. As such, after suffering consecutive traumas from Zhongxian, he was already nearing the point of dissipation. It was not that his mental resilience was too weak, but the fellow before him was simply too exaggerated. To his shock, the 27 flaws listed were also identical to what Kongsha had said back then. Kongsha had not solved them for him back then either, tasking him to find a solution himself. Zhongxian's words had truly enlightened him. The flaws of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm were an issue that had plagued his mind for a very long time, and learning the solutions to them had left him feeling as if he would be content even if he were to die at that very instant. His mind inadvertently slackened, and that single lapse in concentration triggered the start of his dissipation. These are the 18 flaws that I have altered. As for the remaining 9, there's nothing I can do about them at the moment. Very soon, Zhongxian was done reciting the portions of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm that he had corrected. Raising his gaze, he looked at the sculpture once more, and his eyes immediately widened in horror. Ah! What happened to you? The sculpture, which had been trying its best to regather its body earlier, suddenly collapsed onto the ground as if a slab of mud. Even the previously intact head was completely covered with cracks, reminiscent of a spider web. It looked as if it was on the verge of shattering altogether. I see. So, all along, I have been practicing it in the wrong manner. It is no wonder I was unable to reach greater heights despite many years of hard work. Seemingly oblivious to Zhongxian's words, the sculpture muttered in a daze beneath his breath, and more cracks crept across its head. After a momentary lamentation, the sculpture raised his gaze and looked at Zhongxian. Thank you for your guidance. Not only did you manage to decipher my palm art, you even altered it to such perfection. You have cleared my trial, and you are qualified to obtain my heritage. My heritage is. Halfway through his words, however, a loud catcher sounded. Voila! The sculpture's head shattered. Zhongxian was dumbstruck. He hurriedly rushed forward in an attempt to piece the sculpture's head together, but upon contact, the shattered fragments were reduced to dust. The fragmented soul deposited within it had already vanished. You haven't said what your heritage is. Zhongxian's body trembled in anxiety as he nearly spewed blood. Isn't this ancient sage Qiu Wu a little too unreliable? Didn't you say that anyone who cleared your trial will be entitled to your heritage? So, how can you shatter before revealing what your heritage is? Heck, this is too much. He was not the only one who was feeling frenzied by the turn of events. Wu Shi and the others also had their eyes widened in shock, and they nearly burst out crying. After going through so much trouble, just when the heritage seemed to be within reach, the will of ancient sage Qiu Wu ended up being so heavily traumatized by Principal Zhong that he dissipated on the spot before managing to utter a word about the heritage. At this moment, they felt as if someone had taken a treasure that was right before their reach and tossed it into the ocean. What the heck was with that? Moments earlier, they had still been thinking that it was a good thing that they entered the ancient domain together with Zhongxian. His talent, sharp wits, and comprehension of formations were top-notch, and they felt that they would be safe following behind him. If the expedition team were to obtain something good in the ancient domain, they would at least gain a share of it as well. However, at this moment, it dawned on them that they were gravely mistaken. Now that even ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul was traumatized to the point of dissipating on the spot, the heritage had disappeared for good. In other words, there was not even a morsel left for them anymore. Perhaps his time was up, so the sculpture ended up shattering apart. While the crowd was feeling depressed by the situation before them, Zhongxian suddenly spoke up with an apologetic look. Even though we did not manage to obtain ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage, we still have the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm. Mastering it should induce a significant rise in your individual fighting prowess. The crowd nodded. There was no way around it anymore. Since ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul had already dissipated, who else would possibly know what the heritage was and where it could found? There was no point brooding over it anymore. At the very least, they still had a powerful palm art left. With this thought in mind, the crowd turned to the stone tablet once more, but a familiar, crisp sound echoed yet again. Catcher, catcher. Innumerable cracks crept across all of the stone tablets with an unstoppable momentum. Guild leader Han was the first to realize what was going on, and he quickly explained to the dumbfounded crowd, these stone tablets have long exceeded their lifespan. It was only with the reinforcement of ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul that they were able to hold on for so long. With the dissipation of ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul, they are rapidly deteriorating as well. However, before he could finish his words, the ground suddenly began shaking intensely as well. It felt as if the countdown to the utter destruction of the folded space had just begun ticking. Let's quickly leave. Just like the stone tablets, the folded space for the trial was held in place by ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul as well. We have to get out of here as soon as we can. Right after saying those words, guild leader Han hurriedly rushed off, leading the way forward. Knowing that any delay could result in them being trapped eternally within this collapsing folded space, they hurriedly followed guild leader Han as well, not daring to hesitate. Zhongxian also stuck close to the group. Not too long later, they returned back to the flower garden, only to see that Luo Ruoxin was no longer around. They quickly rushed back the way they had come from, and right after they stepped out from the door, the 9 doors behind them abruptly collapsed before vanishing altogether. It was as if what they had gone through earlier was only a mere dream. The crowd looked at one another, and cold sweat gushed down their backs. It was fortunate that they had cleared the trial, thus causing the seal that prevented them from leaving to collapse. Otherwise, they might have just disappeared along with the folded space. That was really a close shot. Where is Ruoxin? Zhongxian asked as he scanning his surroundings anxiously. She was not in the flower garden earlier, so why was she not outside either? Worried, Zhongxian was about to use his eye of insight to track Luo Ruoxin's whereabouts when he suddenly saw the latter flying back from the distance. Luo Ruoxin landed before him and asked, "How was it? Have you obtained the heritage?" Cough cough. We didn't obtain the heritage. Ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul ended up dissipating after being traumatized by Principal Zhong's words before he could even present us with the heritage, Musha explained awkwardly. Ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul dissipated? Luo Ruoxin turned a curious gaze to the young man before her. Zhongxian scratched his head, not knowing how to respond to her gaze. All he had done was to share the alterations he had made to the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm with the other party. It was not like he had said anything much. How was he to know that the other party would be so trauma-prone? To think that he was even known as an ancient sage. This is the manual of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm that I altered earlier. Feel free to cultivate it. Consider it compensation for joining the expedition to the ancient domain. Shaking his head, Zhongxian began writing down a copy of his corrected heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm manual before passing it over to the crowd. Regardless of whether ancient sage Qiu Wu had dissipated due to his words or not, it was a fact that he had prevented the others from obtaining the heritage. The least he could do was offer the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm manual to them as compensation. Thank you. The eyes of the crowd lit up in agitation. Wuxia flipped open the manual, and the others quickly turned their eyes over. Not too long later, they were done going through the secret manual, and they could not help but turn their gazes toward the young man before them with horrified looks. Principal Zhong, is this really the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm? Did you really achieve minor accomplishment in it within just 6 hours of practice? They gulped subconsciously. Without a doubt, the palm art was indeed very powerful. However, it was for the very same reason that mastering it was an extremely difficult feat as well. Putting everything else aside, even if a 7-star high-tier master teacher like Wu Shi were to devote his effort to the technique, it would at least take 10 years for him to achieve novice mastery, let alone minor accomplishment. Yet, such a difficult battle technique, and the fellow before them had actually managed to achieve minor accomplishment within just 6 hours. Furthermore, he was able to harness greater strength than ancient sage Qiu Wu when both of them were at the same cultivation. Just how in the world did he do it? It was no wonder ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul ended up being traumatized to the point of dissipation. If it had been them, they would have reacted in the same manner as well. Thinking back, his previous claim of saying that he had attempted to accept ancient sage Qiu Wu as his student is likely true as well. That freak. The crowd thought in their minds. Chapter 1073, Meeting the Skyleaf King. Once more Zhong Xian watched as the crowd cultivated the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm, but even after a while had passed, none of them was able to reach novice mastery. He couldn't help but shake his head at that sight. While he had altered 18 of the Palm Art's flaws, there were still 9 more to go. As such, practitioners of the technique would still require a vast amount of zhenqi in order to execute it. The members of the expedition team weren't weak either, but unlike Zhong Xian, they hadn't cultivated the Saint Ascension decipher and were lacking in comparison. It couldn't be helped that they wouldn't be able to master the technique in a moment's time. As the saying goes, even the most capable of housewives are unable to prepare a meal without ingredients. No matter how good a teacher Zhong Xian was, there was nothing he could if the crowd's zhenqi capacity and purity were lacking. I am heading to the Saint Ascension Hall to find the old principal. Is there anyone who wishes to tag along? Knowing that they wouldn't make much progress at this rate, Zhong Xian spoke up and said. In any case, he had already imparted the complete heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm to them, so how far they could take the palm art to would depend on their own aptitude. Previously, ancient sage Qiu Wu had said that the old principal and the Skyleaf King had gone into the Saint Ascension Hall. If they intended to save the old principal, they would have to head there as well. Let's go there together. Wu Shi and the others replied with a nod. They had already memorized the formula to the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm, so it was pointless for them to hang around the area anymore. It would be better for them to quickly find Zhong Yinqiu and the others and get out of the ancient domain. Where did you go earlier? As the group headed forward, Zhong Xian suddenly remembered how Luo Ruoxin had left for a brief moment in their absence, so he sent a telepathic message over to ask out of curiosity. I just wandered around the area to take a look. The young lady replied with a smile. I see. Seeing that the other party was unwilling to speak, Zhong Xian chose not to press any further too. Following the markings on the map, it didn't take long for the crowd to arrive before a grand pavilion. There was no plaque above its entrance to indicate its name. Shrouded by mist, it emanated an aura of divinity. Taking a closer look, Guild leader Han remarked with a grim expression, there's a particularly powerful formation constructed around the area. Those who enter might find themselves unable to leave anymore. How about this? Why don't I, Wu Shi, and Principal Zhong enter to take a look first? The rest of you should just wait outside for the moment. The pavilion had an illusory presence that felt as if it was concealed amidst the void. It was apparent that it was shrouded by a massive formation. Furthermore, recalling what ancient sage Qiu Wu had informed them earlier regarding the Saint Ascension Hall, there was very high chance that they might end up being stuck within. Given so, there was no need for all of them to undertake the risk together. Wu Shi, none of us here fears death. Feng Zun said with a grim expression. It's not a problem of whether you fear death or not, but that it will be the end of us all if we were to be trapped within the Saint Ascension Hall together. For the time being, it'll be better for the rest of you to stand guard outside. If we aren't out by 3 days, we may require you to seek help for us. Wu Shi said grimly. All right then. Feng Zun and the others hesitated for a while before nodding reluctantly. You should wait outside as well. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Zhongxian looked at Luo Ruoxin and smiled. He had no idea what would happen within, but there was no doubt that great danger lay within. He didn't want the other party to undertake the risk as well. Let's go together. At the very least, we will be able to look out for one another, the young lady said. But Zhongxian was planning to dissuade Luo Ruoxin, but upon meeting the latter's resolute gaze, he hesitated for a brief moment before eventually nodding. All right. However, you must be very careful after we enter. No matter what happens, your safety comes first. With a light smile, Luo Ruoxin nodded. Afraid that the escaped fragmented primordial spirit of the Skyleaf King would endanger the lives of the remaining group, Zhongxian had guild leader Han to construct a grade 7 pinnacle slaughter formation to protect the surroundings. Only after that was done did they step into the pavilion. The formation constructed around the pavilion worked in a similar fashion to the seal in the subterranean gallery in the sense that it was unidirectional. One would face no impediment entering the pavilion, but after stepping in, the formation would turn into an unbreakable wall confining them within. We are indeed trapped inside. Upon walking into the pavilion, they could feel that the space behind them was sealed up, and they glanced at one another with grim expressions. They quickly scanned their surroundings, and after realizing that there was no apparent danger in the area, they heaved a sigh of relief before advancing ahead. The first floor of the pavilion was extremely vast. There were several rows of stone tablets, and every single one of them was densely inscribed with words. These are insights to achieving a breakthrough to Saint Realm. Taking a closer look and realizing what the content inscribed on the stone tablets were, Zhongxian and Luo Ruoxin traded surprised gazes. They had seen the words on the stone tablets before. They were identical to the insights inscribed on the road up the mountain leading to the Saint Ascension platform. It seems like the Saint Ascension Hall does have a close connection to the Saint Ascension platform. Similar names and stone tablets with identical contents, that was far too much to pass off as a coincidence. Wu Shi and guild leader Han seemed to have been to the Saint Ascension platform before as well, and when they saw the content on the stone tablets, they were stunned for a brief moment as they frowned in bewilderment. Proceeding ahead, they were about to enter the second floor when a surge of sword chi suddenly flew for them from the depths of the Saint Ascension Hall. Boom! Wu Shi and guild leader Han immediately drove their zhenqi to the maximum and rushed forward to face the sudden assault of sword chi. Even without a formation between them, they were still able to synergize their strength together to produce a might far greater than what they could achieve individually. Peng! Upon collision with the sword chi, Wu Shi and guild leader Han were immediately forced back several steps as their faces paled. It's the Skyleaf King! Zhongxian exclaimed. To overwhelm the combined might of two Saint Fordan experts with just a sword chi in itself. The only one who was capable of this feat was only the Skyleaf King, whom was trapped in the Saint Ascension Hall as well. Hey, not bad. Zhongxian, I might not have been able to done anything to you if you hadn't entered the Saint Ascension Hall. But since you chose to come in, don't even dream about getting out of here alive. With a cold harumph, the Skyleaf King's voice echoed deafeningly throughout the Saint Ascension Hall. In the next moment, a towering figure slowly walked out from the depths of the pavilion. Unlike the primordial spirit whom they had seen before, the Skyleaf King before them possessed a tangible body. He had a tall stature which towered over even the Scarlet Leaf King and the Stoneleaf King. You recognize me? Then, that fragmented primordial spirit. Zhongxian was stunned for an instant before realizing that the fragmented primordial spirit must have reported the happenings back to the Skyleaf King through some unique means. Or perhaps, the fragmented primordial spirit might have even flown back in to fuse back together with the Skyleaf King. Since you are so audacious as to harm my primordial spirit, I'm going to make sure that you suffer a fate worse than death. Sneering coldly, the Skyleaf King raised his finger and flicked it lightly towards Zhongxian. Alarmed, Wu Shi and guild leader Han hurriedly rushed forward to cover Zhongxian, driving their zhenqi to its capacity to fend off the Skyleaf King's attack. Peng! Peng! With two dull thuds, the duo was sent flying. They were top-notch experts even when taking the entire Qingyuan-conferred empire into account, but their cultivation was still a step away from matching up with the Skyleaf King, and this single step produced a world of difference in their fighting prowess. Principal Zhong, run away. Wu Shi forcefully twisted his body so as to regain his balance and land back onto the floor, but the rebound from doing so caused a spurt of blood to spew from his mouth. Knowing that it would be difficult for them to fend off the Skyleaf King, Wu Shi bellowed. Even before the other party had drawn out his primordial spirit, the both of them were already no match for him. If the other party were to really use his full strength, they could be annihilated in an instant. Run away? Are you really that delusional as to think that you can still run away at this point? The Skyleaf King burst into laughter as he grasped at the space before him. Voila! In an instant, a powerful force shrouded the entire hall, sealing all paths of escape for them. This is truly bad. Not expecting that they would meet with a fully powered Skyleaf King right after entering the Saint Ascension Hall, Zhongxian's eyes narrowed. The other party was already guarded against him, so it would be impossible for him to beguile the other party to go along with his flow anymore. At the same time, fighting the other party face-on wasn't an option either. Were they really going to meet their end here? Break. Raising his palm, he executed the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm, directing it towards the seal which the Skyleaf King had just set up. Wang. Similar to the surface of a lake, upon striking on the seal, the force rippled on it for a moment, but it didn't break it apart. Instead, a force suddenly surged back towards Zhongxian, forcing him to retreat several steps back. This is a secret art which I have come up with in the 2 years I was trapped here. Not even a Saint 5 Dan expert will be able to break it open, so do you think that a nascent saint cultivator like you will be able to do so? Noting Zhongxian's actions, the Skyleaf King scoffed coldly. Guild leader Han and Wu Shi and stood up and attempted their strongest battle techniques against the seal, but it was completely ineffective as well. I still need to comprehend those stuff that Kongsha left behind, so I have no time to be idling here with you. Let's end this quickly. Gazing upon the group coldly, the Skyleaf King raised his finger and shot a burst of sword chi towards them once more. This time, the might harnessed within the sword chi was greater than the ones before. It was directed straight towards Zhongxian, and if it were to strike, not even a deity would be able to bring him back to life. It won't be easy to get out of here alive. Zhongxian sighed deeply. He wasn't even a match for a fragment of the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit, let more the other party at full strength. Furthermore, it seemed like the other party had also advanced his cultivation a fair bit over the past 2 years, placing them in an extremely disastrous position. Nevertheless, he wasn't one to give up without a fight. Just as he was about to let his clone out to withstand the might of the sword chi, a brilliant radiance suddenly burst in the area. A loud buzzing sound reverberated before a thick layer of mist abruptly set into the area. It's a grade 7 pinnacle formation plate. Only a grade 7 pinnacle formation plate could produce such a thick layer of mist which even Saint Realm experts couldn't peer through in an instant. But grade 7 pinnacle formation plates were incredibly rare, such that even guild leader Han didn't have any of it. Why would it suddenly appear here? Everyone, follow me. Just as the crowd was feeling deeply perplexed, a voice abruptly sounded in their ears. Following which, the silhouette of an elder appeared before their eyes. That is Vice Principal Ji Yang. Upon getting a closer glimpse of the other party's appearance, Wu Shi couldn't help but exclaim, "I'm indeed Ji Yang. Wu Shi, please follow me." The elder nodded hurriedly as he gestured forward. All right. Nodding, Wu Shi beckoned for the others to follow them closely before heading in the direction gestured by the elder. Vice Principal Ji Yang? Hearing the conversation between the duo, Zhongxian came to a realization. Just like the previous Vice Principal Mu Runshu, the elder before him was a Vice Principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy as well. The other party had entered the ancient domain together with old Principal Zhong Inqiu back then, and one way or another, they had managed to survive till now. His cultivation. While following behind the group, Zhongxian discreetly sneaked a peek at the elder, and his eyebrows shot up in astonishment. Vice Principal Ji Yang should only possess a cultivation of Saint 1 Dan Pinnacle 2 years ago, just like Vice Principal Mu Runshu and the others. Yet, at this moment, his cultivation was already at Saint 4 Dan, on par with Wu Shi and Guild Leader Han, to leap 3 realms within just 2 years, and in Saint Realm at that. This was too exaggerated. Your strength. Having noticed the anomaly in Vice Principal Ji Yang's strength as well, Wuxia couldn't help but ask. The spiritual energy in here is significantly more concentrated as compared to the external world, and Kongsha has also left behind a fair bit of treasures. On top of that, we had to pit our wits and strength against the Skyleaf King day after day in the past 2 years, so we would have long died if we hadn't managed to grow that quickly. Vice Principal Ji Yang replied with a bitter smile. Noting a particular word in Vice Principal Ji Yang's words, Zhongxian asked, "How many people are left in your group?" The expedition team which the old principal had brought into the ancient domain back then consisted of roughly a group of 30. Considering how there were roughly a dozen corpses outside, there should be at least 17 or 18 of them survivors remaining. There are less than 3 of us remaining. Vice Principal Ji Yang sighed deeply. Less than 3 of us? Zhongxian was perplexed by the response. There must be either 2 or 3 of them remaining in the group. What did less than 3 mean? Could there be 2.5 of them remaining? Chapter 1074, We Can't Escape. You will know once you come along with me. Noting the perplexed looks on the faces around him, Vice Principal Ji Yang shook his head bitterly and replied. Traversing through the mist, they soon arrived at a certain room. There were all kinds grade 7 pinnacle seals and traps lying all around the area. Even for an expert of the Skyleaf King's caliber, there was no doubt that he would be torn into shreds if he were to be trapped within them. Upon seeing this sight, Zhongxian nodded in realization. Judging from the current situation, it seemed like the Skyleaf King wielded the absolute advantage within the Saint Ascension Hall. Unable to stand up against him, they could only remain within this room and set up formations and traps so as to fend off the other party. Pushing open the door and entering, the room was only roughly several dozen square meters large. There wasn't a single window within the room, and the only source of light within it was the dim radiance of a night illumination pearl. Leaning against the wall was an old man whose both legs and right arm had been severed. Nevertheless, upon seeing the group which had returned, he hurriedly flew up and rushed towards them with eyes filled with disbelief. Vice Principal Ji, this. For the past 2 years, they had been the only humans within the Saint Ascension Hall. Thus, it wasn't too difficult to imagine his imagination upon seeing Zhongxian and the others. Vice Principal Tan, this is Wu Shi from Qingyuan Conferred Empire. Vice Principal Ji Yang introduced. Vice Principal Tan? You are Tan Qing from the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy? Finding the name familiar, Zhongxian pondered for a moment, and a figure abruptly surfaced in his mind. The Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy had a total of 4 vice principals, and Mu Runxu, Ji Yang, and Tan Qing were 3 of them. That's indeed me. Tan Qing nodded. With a perplexed look, he turned to Ji Yang and asked, May I know how I should address these master teachers? This. Actually, I encountered them while they were being pursued by the Skyleaf King, so I quickly saved them and led them back here. I haven't really gotten a chance to ask them for their names yet. Vice Principal Ji Yang replied. As the situation was very precarious earlier, there wasn't any time for them to introduce themselves to one another. As such, he wasn't too sure whom the other 3 beside Wu Shi were either. This young man over here is the newly appointed principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, Zhong Shi. This young lady is Luo Ruoxin, Luo Shi. Last but not least, this elder is the head of the Qingyuan Conferred Empire Formation Master Guild, Han Shu. Wu Shi swiftly introduced the group. Newly appointed principal. Upon hearing the introduction, the eyes of the duo quickly turned to Zhongxian, and a deep frown appeared on their foreheads. They weren't able to report the matter to the headquarters before heading to the ancient domain due to the urgency of the matter back then, so their abrupt disappearance was bound to create some chaos in the leadership of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. It was understandable that they would attempt to elect a new principal as soon as possible in order to stabilize the situation, but still, the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy was still one of the 4 great academies. How could they allow a mere nascent saint cultivator, not to mention such a young child, to become the principal? Weren't they making too light of Hongyuan? Principal Zhong might be young, but he possesses extraordinary capabilities. It's due to him that we were able to advance through the ancient domain safely. Noting the complicated looks on the duo, Wu Shi could tell what they were thinking, so he hurriedly stepped forward to speak on Zhongxian's behalf. To be honest, Zhongxian was simply too young that it was inevitable that others would doubt his capabilities. Even he himself had doubted the legitimacy of the other party's inauguration as the principal back then, let more the duo before him. You're right. How could a person who was able to venture so deeply into the ancient domain possibly be someone ordinary? After hearing Wu Shi's words, the duo pondered for a moment before nodding in agreement. They had experienced the brutality of the Qiu Wu Palace firsthand, so they knew very well the dangers that lurked all around. Without outstanding capability, it was impossible for one to venture safely from the entrance to this point. Not to mention, even a person as esteemed as Wu Shi had chosen to speak on the behalf of Zhongxian. Scanning the room, Zhongxian realized that a certain person was nowhere to be seen, so he asked with a perplexed frown, "Where is old Principal Zhong Yinqiu?" Since the two vice principals were still alive, the old principal who had just sent the principal's seal out shortly before should still be alive as well. Why wasn't he anywhere to be seen? Not to mention, Vice Principal Ji Yang had earlier replied his question with not a 2 but a less than 3. Principal Zhong Yinqiu. Ji Yang and Tan Qing glanced at one another as the light in their eyes dulled. After a moment of silence, Ji Yang was the one who spoke up, "He's already dead." "Dead? But Vice Principal Ji, didn't you say earlier that there were less than 3 of you remaining?" "There are only 2 of you here." The one who spoke this time around was Guild Leader Han. Clearly, he had also noticed the anomaly in Vice Principal Ji's words earlier. If there were only 2 of them remaining, an ordinary person would respond with a 2. However, Vice Principal Ji Yang had replied with a less than 3 instead. There was bound to be a deeper reason behind it. There was no way a 6-star pinnacle master teacher would make such an elementary verbal mistake. Indeed, there is still one more person other than us around, and he is Principal Zhong Yinqiu. However, the current state he is in, it's truly no different from being dead. However, he isn't here at the moment. I can only bring you to meet him within a specific timing, Vice Principal Ji Yang explained. No different from being dead. Wu Shi and the others glanced at one another in bewilderment, unsure of what the 2 vice principals were driving at. However, looking at the duo, it seemed like they were reluctant to speak of it anymore, so they decided not to probe too deep at the moment as well. After a momentary pause, Wu Shi turned his gaze over and asked, "What happened 2 years ago? Why didn't you report the matter to the headquarters?" In truth, Wu Shi wasn't the only one who had been pondering over this question. Even Zhongxian found the matter incredulous as well. Considering how the old principal had erected a tomb for himself in the Mausoleum of Principals, there was no doubt that he was aware that the dangers lurking in the ancient domain were far beyond his means. Given so, the logical course of action should be to report the matter to the Superior Master Teacher Pavilion. So, why did he remain silent on the matter, choosing to assemble an expedition team out of his own academy instead? It's not that he doesn't want to report the matter to the headquarters, but that there was no time for it. Vice Principal Ji Yang shook his head with a bitter smile. "Wu Shi, you are quite close with Principal Zhong Yinqiu, so you should be aware that he idolizes Elder Wu Yangzi a lot. The greatest interest in his pastime was to explore the history of Elder Wu Yangzi and investigate his disappearance. Under his relentless efforts, he eventually found some intelligence and an important artifact concerning the ancient domain. His immediate response was to report the matter to the headquarters, but somehow, the news managed to travel to the ears of the otherworldly demonic tribe before he could do so. In the end, not only did the otherworldly demonic tribe manage to dupe the important artifact away, they even managed to learn of the deeper secrets concerning the ancient domain. Shortly after, he learned that the ancient domain was on the verge of opening, and there was no time to be lost. Thus, he gathered all of us overnight and rushed over as soon as possible. Vice Principal Ji Yang's explanation only served to deepen the frown on Wu Shi's forehead. Zhong Yinqiu has a communication jade token connected straight to the headquarters. As long as he wishes to, he could inform the headquarters of the matter any time he liked. It wouldn't have delayed him by too much. So why didn't he do so? It wouldn't take more than 10 breaths for Zhong Yinqiu to construct a message to the headquarters to inform them in detail of the entire incident. For a person who gathered an expedition team overnight and rushed right towards the ancient domain. Surely sending a message shouldn't be too difficult. Claiming that there was no time for it was truly a poor excuse. If I am not mistaken, instead of saying that the news traveled to the ears of the otherworldly demonic tribe, perhaps it might be more accurate to say that they had insider news on the matter. In other words, a spy of the otherworldly demon had intercepted the message before it reached the headquarter, and that spy happens to be from the headquarter as well, and this left old Principal Zhong Yinqiu deeply distrustful of the headquarter. Am I right? Zhong Xian pondered for a brief moment before stating his deduction. Since Zhong Yinqiu didn't send out the message to the headquarter to inform that of the matter, that could only mean that there was something preventing him from doing so. This Zhong Shi is indeed astute. It's indeed as you have said. Hearing those words, Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing couldn't help but nod their heads in awe. To be able to deduce this far based on the nuances of their words, this young Zhong Shi's discernment ability was truly outstanding. It was no wonder why he was eventually elected to succeed Principal Zhong Yinqiu as the new principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. Spy! From the headquarter, Wu Shi was stunned for a moment before he clenched his fists tightly together. He was a smart person as well, and it didn't take him too long to figure out what was going on. In the first place, Zhong Yinqiu didn't have much of an understanding of the Qingyuan conferred Empire Master Teacher Pavilion. Thus, when he was duped of the important artifact and intelligence from a fake master teacher from the headquarter, he became deeply apprehensive. He didn't know whom he could trust, so eventually, he didn't send out a message at all. Perhaps Zhong Yinqiu was intending to pay a visit to the Qingyuan conferred Empire Master Teacher Pavilion to inform them of the matter personally, but he abruptly received news that the otherworldly demonic tribe was about to enter the ancient domain. Left with no choice, he could only assemble an expedition team by himself and head in personally, and eventually none of them managed to return back. Who is it? Wu Shi's eyes narrowed menacingly. He knew all of the master teachers in the headquarter, so who in the world could the spy be? We are all trapped here, so it's meaningless even if we were to reveal the name to you now. Vice Principal Ji Yang shook his head in disconsolation. It was not like any one of them could escape and apprehend the spy, so what was the point of them speaking about the matter at the moment? Since that was going to be the case, they might as well just remain silent, so as the very least, there would be one less frustration for them to bother about. Is it really impossible to escape from here? Guild leader Han asked. Yuan. I'm sure you should have seen the seal outside. It's constructed in a manner that makes it unidirectional, only allowing one to enter but not to leave. It is most probably set up by ancient sage Qiu Wu himself, so, unless one were to obtain his heritage and comprehend the secret behind the seal, otherwise it will be impossible to escape from here. Vice Principal Tan Qing shook his head. At this moment, he suddenly recalled a matter, and he looked at Wu Shi and the others and asked with a gleam of hope in his eyes, right. Back then, the Skyleaf King was tight on our trail, and we weren't able to shake him free. As such, we could only escape here directly. However, on your journey here, you should have noticed the door leading to ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage, right? How is it? Did you obtain the heritage? This. Hearing those words, a look of awkwardness surfaced on the faces of Wu Shi and the others. They did manage to enter the correct door, they successfully met ancient sage Qiu Wu's sculpture as well, and they even cleared the trial smoothly. But, they still failed to obtain the heritage. Would the two vice principals believe them if they were to tell them of such a bizarre matter? What's wrong? Could it be that you didn't notice the mark Principal Zhong Yinqiu left behind? Noticing the peculiar expressions on the faces around him, Vice Principal Ji Yang couldn't help but ask. The mark was very apparent, so surely master teachers of their caliber should have noticed it easily. You were indeed the ones who had left the mark behind. But since you know that the heritage lies within the door, why didn't you enter to take a look? It was Guild Leader Han's turn to be perplexed this time around. Since the mark was left behind by them, it should be apparent that they had opened the doors and confirmed the correct one to advance to. Since that was the case, why didn't they enter it? If they had chosen to enter it, the Skyleaf King could have died under the might of ancient sage Qiu Wu. Back then, We did manage to trigger the mechanism in the square that causes the 9 doors to appear. However, shortly after we confirmed the right door, before we even had the opportunity to check it out, the Skyleaf King arrived at the square as well. The implications of ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage is simply too great. If the Skyleaf King were to obtain it, it could become a calamity for the entire mankind. We can't afford to take such a gamble, and we dare not to either. Thus, Principal Zhong Yinqiu secretly left a mark on the door before rushing over here. Having a skeptical personality, even though the Skyleaf King saw the 9 doors, he dared not to enter to check them out either for fear of it being a trap, so he continued pursuing us instead. Eventually, all of us ended up here. Vice Principal Ji Yang recounted the situation back then. His words and description were nonchalant, but Zhong Xian and the others could feel how intense the situation was back then. The fact that Vice Principal Mu Runxiu had lost his life in the square, and the others had to flee without having an opportunity to collect his corpse went to show how dangerous the situation was back then. By the time we entered the pavilion, we were already all exhausted. Even though we managed to slaughter all of the otherworldly demons aside from the Skyleaf King remained, we also suffered great casualties in the process, to the point that we are the only survivors of the initial expedition team. It is fortunate that the terrain within here is complicated, that's why we were able to survive till now. Otherwise, we would have sure been wiped out long ago. Vice Principal Ji Yang sighed. I see. The crowd nodded in response. They had all experienced the fearsome might of the Skyleaf King themselves. Even a collaboration between the powerful Wu Shi and guild leader Han wasn't sufficient to match him. Considering how Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing were only at St. Wandan Pinnacle back then, it wasn't difficult to imagine how helpless they would have been. It had truly been difficult for them to have survived 2 years while being trapped with the Skyleaf King. Right, you still haven't told us whether you have managed to obtain ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage or not. After explaining the matter, Vice Principal Ji Yang asked once more. This matter involved whether they would be able to escape from here or not, so he was determined to clarify this matter. We managed to clear the trial, but before ancient sage Qiu Wu could reveal to us what his heritage was, his fragmented soul had already dissipated after suffering multiple traumas from Principal Zhong. After a long moment of silence, Wu Shi finally spoke up. Chapter 1075, Celestial Saint. I can give it a try. Dissipated, after suffering several traumas? What do you mean? Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing were stunned, unable to process what they had just heard. If the other party were to say that they failed to find the correct door or that they did not even trigger the mechanism that induced the appearance of the 9 doors in the first place, they would still be able to understand it. But, to dissipate ancient sage Qiu Wu's soul by traumatizing him. Why did it sound so profound that they could not understand a word of it? May I trouble you to clarify the matter a little more? Noticing the 2 bewildered faces before him, Wu Shi's face reddened. He really had no idea how he was supposed to explain the matter to them, so he turned to guild leader Han for help. I think it'll be better for you to say it instead. All right. The situation is like this. With a deep sigh, guild leader Han contemplated over his choice of phrases before he began recounting the matter. You are saying that Zhong Shi managed to see through the flaws in ancient sage Qiu Wu's palm art? Not only did he manage to practice it to a mastery of minor accomplishment, he even corrected it on top of that. Not to mention, he offered to take ancient sage Qiu Wu in as his student. The 2 vice principals widened their mouths in shock, and they nearly blacked out on the spot. Surely, they must have been listening to a fictional story. How could there be such a ridiculous master teacher in the world? That was ancient sage Qiu Wu. All who had heard of his affairs would revere him like a deity, not daring to even breathe loudly before him. Yet, that fellow actually offered to take ancient sage Qiu Wu in as his student. Do you not understand the meaning of what taking a person in as your student means, or are your guts so inflated that even ancient sage Qiu Wu means nothing to you? Cough cough. Noticing the shocked gazes of the duo on him, Zhong Xian quickly explained himself. All I did was share the flaws of the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm with ancient sage Qiu Wu. I didn't expect that he would be so brittle, collapsing at the slightest trauma. Geez, He really does need to temper his mind a little more. To be honest, he also did not intend for such a situation to happen. It was not as if he had done it intentionally. Brittle. Temper. The duo was rendered completely speechless by Zhongxian's words. One of the most renowned ancient sages of the Master-Teacher Pavilion, a figure who had stood alongside the world's teacher through numerous crises. It was already a blessing that he did not die from anger from having a several dozen millenniums younger junior like Zhongxian attempting to take him in as his student, and yet, the young man expected him not to be traumatized by the matter. Not to mention, he altered the prided palm art that the other party created on the spot, strengthening it significantly. The fact that Qiu Wu was still able to talk to him after that was already testimony to his incredible mental resilience. A moment later, Vice Principal Ji Yang shook his head with a bitter smile. So, you didn't receive the heritage either. It seems like we really won't be getting out of here today. A treasure trove was right before them, but that fellow ended up pushing it right off the cliff. How in the world did such a ridiculous master teacher become their new principal? They were really starting to worry for the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy's future. But in any case, without the heritage, they would not be able to escape from the place either. Their worry would not change a thing at all. They were still hoping that those who had received their news would come to their rescue, but from the looks of it, their expectations might have truly been a little too high. Paying no heed to the disappointed looks around him, Zhongxian asked, "What exactly is the Saint Ascension Hall? How is it related to the Saint Ascension Platform?" Saint Ascension Hall and Saint Ascension Platform. Given how similar their names were and that they were both related to Kongsha, it was hard to believe that there was no relation between the both of them. There's indeed a relationship between the both of them. If I'm not mistaken. Vice Principal Ji Yang began to reply, but before he could finish his words, the ground suddenly began trembling intensely, and it felt as if the pavilion would cave in on them at any moment. Alarmed, Wu Shi and the others asked anxiously, "What's going on?" Vice Principal Ji Yang seemed to be very used to the trembling, and after a moment of hesitation, he said, "This happens every single day at irregular intervals. Let's go. I'll bring you to meet Principal Zhong Inqiu. However, just a word of warning, we will only have an incense's time. We will have to return here before then, or else we will face grave danger like before." Meet Principal Zhong Inqiu? The crowd was stunned for a moment before nodding. "All right. Let's go." Without wasting any more time on words, Vice Principal Ji Yang led the way forward. As Vice Principal Tan Qing had lost 3 of his limbs, and there were several places where he would be unable to fly, he decided to remain behind. Bypassing the many formations and traps outside, the group headed straight forward, and before long, they arrived at the very top of the Saint Ascension Hall. The roof of the Saint Ascension Hall was flat, and at the very center, there was a round platform, which emanated a brilliant glow. The previous tremor seemed to have originated from the energy released by the round platform. This is... Zhongxian was taken aback. The round platform before him was identical to the one that had appeared after the cliff face on the Saint Ascension platform collapsed previously. Back then, after he had pointed out the flaws in Kongsha's writings, the cliff face broke apart, and a round platform emerged from within. Standing above it, he and Luo Ruoxin had ended up being transported into a folded space. Back then, he had thought that the round platform was the place where Kongsha had seated when he ascended to become a celestial saint. However, from the looks of it now, it seemed like he was mistaken. Noticing Zhongxian's confusion, Vice Principal Ji Yang explained, "Indeed. This is real Saint Ascension platform that Kongsha left behind when he ascended to sainthood. The one outside is nothing more than an imitation. This is the real Saint Ascension platform." Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. The conferment of a celestial saint was not a small matter. The lands where the conferment occurred would surely be suffused with the energy of the world, so how could there only be a few halos here and there? Furthermore, how could such an important landmark be left open on the top of a mountain, not fearing that it would be found by anyone? Activating his eye of insight, Zhongxian began examining the Saint Ascension platform carefully. There a peculiar sheet of light covering the top of the round platform, and ripples of energy were flowing on top of it. The ripples of energy seemed to carry an extraordinary quality to nourish the saint aura within one. It felt like one could advance one's cultivation significantly just by taking in a whiff of it. Even a sliver of energy emanated from a celestial saint is a great nourishment to ordinary cultivators like us. It is due to it that I was able to advance my cultivation so quickly, Vice Principal Ji Yang said. The others nodded in agreement. The energy emanated by the round platform felt warm, as if one was bathed amid sacred light. Even though it had not been long since Wu Shi and the others had arrived in the Saint Ascension Hall, they could feel that their thought process had quickened significantly, and the cells in their bodies had grown more vigorous as well. Under such circumstances, their rate of cultivation would be enhanced immensely. As long as one's talent was not too bad, advancing 3 realms within just a short 2 years under such circumstances was entirely possible. At this point, Vice Principal Ji Yang stepped forward, and pointing to an area not too far away from the round platform, he said, "Principal Zhong Yinqiu is here." Taken aback, the crowd hurriedly turned their gazes over, only to see a statue standing in the direction Vice Principal Ji Yang pointed out. The statue was extremely lifelike, and it bore a striking resemblance with the paintings of Zhong Yinqiu within the Master Teacher Academy. A calm voice suddenly came from the statue. "Wu Shi, you are here." To their astonishment, just like the situation with ancient sage Qiu Wu earlier, the statue had opened his mouth and begun speaking. "Zhong Yinqiu, why would you?" Seeing the plight his old friend was in, Wu Shi could not help but feel a dull ache in his heart. It was no wonder Vice Principal Ji Yang said that there were less than 3 of them remaining. The fact that Zhong Yinqiu was still able to speak and recognize them meant that he still retained consciousness, so he could not be considered dead yet. But, trapped within a lifeless statue, could he really be considered alive? In the midst of saving us, Principal Zhong Yinqiu's body was destroyed by the Skyleaf King. By a stroke of luck, the Saint Ascension platform suddenly whirred into action at the moment, and under the nourishment of the sacred light, his soul managed to avoid dissipation, and he ended up latching onto a statue in the vicinity. Even though he retained his consciousness, he is unable to move or leave the premises, Vice Principal Ji Yang explained. The situation back then had been extremely complex. Principal Zhong Yinqiu's physical body had been forcefully destroyed by the Skyleaf King, and just as everyone thought that he would have died, the Saint Ascension platform that Kongsha had left behind suddenly worked its miracles. Under the warm glow of the sacred light, his soul managed to survive despite having lost its body, and he eventually ended up latching onto a nearby statue for survival. As time passed, the statue began shaping itself into him. However, he was still unable to move at all. All he could manage to do was stand quietly and await the end of time. Honestly, there truly was not much difference from death. Realization suddenly struck Zhong Xian. The contract between the old principal and the Byzantium Alios beast wasn't a soul contract but a blood contract. Given that the old principal's physical body was destroyed, the contract between them was naturally dispelled as well. That explains why I was unable to tell whom his master was through the library of Heaven's Path. Most of the saint beasts and spirit beasts he had tamed were contracted to him via a soul contract. Such a contract would place the souls of the tamed beasts under his control, thus making it impossible for them to betray him. Naturally, most saint beasts and spirit beasts would not commit to such a disadvantageous contract to them unless they were forced into a corner. Thus, the norm was to establish a blood contract, and that was also the type of contract between the old principal and the Byzantium Alios beast. While blood contracts would grant the master a certain degree of control over their tamed beast, unlike soul contracts, the relationship would be automatically dispelled once the physical body of the owner died. It was also due to this that the Library of Heaven's Path did not reflect the old principal as the Byzantium Alios beast's master, thus resulting in the huge farce back then. Seeing the sorrowful faces all around him, as well as the pale face of his old friend, Principal Zhong Yinqiu said with a smile, "Don't worry, this is actually not too bad. At the very least, I'm still alive." Being trapped in a statue was not something that he desired, but at the very least, it was better than having his soul dissipated entirely. After consoling the crowd for a while, Zhong Yinqiu asked, "Since you were able to come this far, I'm sure you should have seen the marks I left behind." Did you obtain ancient sage Qiu Wu's heritage? As long as they had obtained the heritage, they would be able to finally escape from the Saint Ascension Hall for good. Zhong Yinqiu himself would not be able to leave the area, but at the very least, Ji Yang and Tan Qing would be able to get away, thus preserving some strength for the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. They didn't manage to obtain the heritage. Ji Yang quickly filled Zhong Yinqiu in on the matter. You. Upon hearing the explanation, Zhong Yinqiu's eyes widened in shock. He looked at Zhong Xian as if he was seeing a ghost. Many words lingered at the tip of his tongue, but eventually, he said helplessly, without the heritage of ancient sage Qiu Wu, it'll be impossible for us to leave. Unless one of us can receive the acknowledgement of the heavens and be conferred as a celestial saint, we will be trapped in here for life. Conferred as a celestial saint. Zhong Xian was taken aback. UN. The Saint Ascension Hall contains the true Saint Ascension platform, as well as innumerable insights from other cultivators when they achieved sainthood, Zhong Yinqiu said. All of this is just for a single aim. Kongshe is hoping to raise another celestial saint among the later generations. As long as one can achieve a breakthrough on the Saint Ascension platform and become a celestial saint, the seal surrounding the Saint Ascension Hall will fall apart immediately. Upon hearing the conditions to leave, a bitter smile emerged on the lips of Wu Shi and the others. That's impossible. Indeed, how could that possibly be done? In the whole of history, only Kongshe had managed to receive the acknowledgement of the heavens and be conferred as a celestial saint. This was clear proof of how difficult the feat was, so how could they possibly hope to emulate that? Ji Yang sighed. When we joined this expedition, we resigned ourselves to death and made arrangements accordingly. It's already a blessing of the heavens that we are still alive at this point. Actually. Noting the air of desolation among the crowd, Zhong Xian hesitated for a moment before looking at them. A breakthrough to celestial saint, I can give it a try. Chapter 1076, He slaughtered 9 of them you. Hearing Zhong Xian's interjection, everyone paused for a moment. All of them looked at him as if they were looking at a fool. Cough cough. Unable to stand the awkward silence that drifted in the air, Wu Shi coughed loudly before continuing on. Principal Zhong, I know that you possess superior talent, and you have a unique interpretation to cultivation. However, celestial saint is not something which anyone can just become. In fact, it could be said that it is impossible for anyone to succeed. Indeed. I have specially looked into the process how Kongshe ascended to sainthood, traveling to the Saint Ascension platform myself and flipping through many records. Based on my deduction, the first requirement to becoming a celestial saint is to be a celestial master teacher. Only when the heavens recognize your occupation will you be qualified to become a celestial saint. Other than that, you must also practice a peerless cultivation technique which grants you incomparably condensed junqi. That is the basic requirement for you to knock on the doors of the world and rid yourself of all impurities, thus stepping on the path to unparalleled greatness. Hearing Zhong Xian speaking such words, Zhong Yinqiu couldn't help but offer a word of advice as well. The fact that you are able to decipher the secret hidden amidst ancient sage Qiu Wu's palm art shows that you have an exceptional understanding of battle techniques. Also, considering how you were able to come so far through the ancient domain despite only being a nascent saint, you must possess an extraordinary cultivation technique as well. However, just that in itself wouldn't suffice for you to become a celestial saint. Ascending to sainthood is no child's play. Throughout history, how many geniuses do you think have emerged amongst the sage clans and the combat master hall? Yet, for several dozen millenniums, there was not a person who was said to have succeeded in becoming a celestial saint. This goes to show how difficult it is. Principal Zhong, you can give it a try, but you really shouldn't put too much hope into it. Guild leader Han said with a bitter smile. There was not a person who thought well of Zhong Xian. This. All right then. Zhong Xian was considering on whether he should reveal his identity, but eventually, he chose to shake his head and remain silent. In truth, while he was a celestial master teacher and he had cultivated the Saint Ascension decipher, he was still unsure whether he would truly be able to become a celestial saint either. He didn't want to give them false hope only to have it shattered eventually. Besides, he was a humble person at heart, and boasting about his own achievements wasn't something that a person like him would do anyway. It's good that you have managed to think it through. Becoming a celestial saint is no easy task. Of course, it'll be best if one of us succeeds in doing so, but otherwise, there's no need to get too disappointed either. Vice Principal Ji Yang nodded. He was just about to continue speaking when the layer of light atop the round platform abruptly wavered, and gradually, it began dimming. Upon seeing this sight, Vice Principal Ji Yang's face immediately turned grave. Time's up, everyone. We have to leave quickly. Principal Zhong Yinqiu, we will visit you again tomorrow. After saying those words, Vice Principal Ji Yang quickly led the group down. Seeing how anxious Vice Principal Ji Yang was, the crowd quickly followed behind him. Not too long later, they finally returned to the narrow room they were in previously, and only then did Vice Principal Ji Yang heave a sigh of relief. What's going on? Why do we have to rush back so anxiously? Wu Shi couldn't help but ask. Didn't I say earlier that we only have an incense's time? Vice Principal Ji Yang asked. The crowd nodded. The other party did say such words before. For nearly a year now, the Saint Ascension platform has been releasing a brilliant glow every single day. During the period of time which the Saint Ascension Hall is permeated by the light, the Skyleaf King would have no choice but to remain in his hiding spot, not daring to move in the least. Otherwise, he would risk being burned by the sacred light and suffer severe damage to his primordial spirit. We have been making use for this period of time to explore the Saint Ascension Hall. However, the light will only remain for roughly an incense's time, and once it retreats, the Skyleaf King will rush out and slaughter any of us who is still loitering vulnerably in the area. Vice Principal Ji Yang explained. Everyone came to a realization. This explained why Vice Principal Ji Yang was so anxious when he saw that the sacred light is about to die out. If the Skyleaf King were to assault them before they made their way back to the room, they would have been in grave danger. I was wondering why the rest of you are able to make such a great advancement in your cultivation realm over the past 2 years, whereas the Skyleaf King still remains in leaving Aperture Realm primary stage. It seems like the sacred light that you have spoken of does play a huge role in this matter, Wu Shi remarked in realization. You're right. Master teachers are able to raise their cultivation by absorbing the sacred light, but otherworldly demons aren't able to do the same. As such, the Skyleaf King hasn't been able to grow as quickly as the rest of us. However, he has conquered the entire Saint Ascension Hall for himself. Back then, probably in order to ensure that there would be at least one amongst the later generation who would be able to become a celestial saint as well, Kongsha had left behind quite a fortune behind, but it is currently being dominated by the Skyleaf King. Over the past 2 years, even though he hadn't achieved a breakthrough yet, his primordial spirit has been getting more and more powerful. With our current strength, we won't be able to deal with him. Vice Principal Ji Yang shook his head. You said that the Saint Ascension platform only began releasing a brilliant glow every single day within the past year? Does that not happen in the past? Zhong Xian's focus was a little different from the others. He was more interested in the Saint Ascension platform. A year ago, the Saint Ascension platform was still rather normal. While it would emanate sacred light from time to time back then, the intensity was nothing close to what we saw previously, and its frequency was irregular as well. It's only around the end of the 8th month last year that it suddenly began releasing huge bursts of light, as if heralding the arrival of a certain someone. Well, I don't really know the details myself either. Ji Yang pondered for a moment before replying with a nod. Trapped within the Saint Ascension Hall, where the concept of day and night didn't exist, they were gradually losing their grasp over time. Nevertheless, as master teachers, they were still able to fathom a rough guess who could it be waiting for. Kongsha. Right after saying those words, guild leader Han shook his head with a helpless smile. Kongsha had gone missing several dozen millenniums ago. Even the 72 sages knew not about his whereabouts, let more the others. It was inconceivable that he would return all of a sudden after so many years. Not even saints possess a longevity of several dozen millenniums, so I don't think it's possible that the Saint Ascension platform is waiting for Kongsha. Perhaps, you might have triggered some kind of mechanism within the Saint Ascension Hall after arriving here, thus resulting in the emanation of sacred light every day. Wu Shi remarked. That might be the case. Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing nodded. Limited by their strength and eye of discernment, there were many things that were beyond their understanding. Putting everything aside, they had no idea where the sacred light emanating from the Saint Ascension platform had come from. It was also inconceivable to them why it could keep the Skyleaf King at bay while benefiting the master teachers. Alright, let's not talk about this matter anymore. Those are simply too far away from us at the moment, so there's no point discussing it. Vice Principal Tan Qing, I have a grand intermittence pill here. Give it a try, perhaps it could resolve your current condition. Shaking his head, Wu Shi turned to Vice Principal Tan Qing and whipped out a jade bottle. At this moment, Vice Principal Tan Qing had both of his legs and right arm severed, crippling his movements. Only the legendary Grade 7 Grand Intermittence Pill, said to be able to induce the regrowth of a severed limb, would have a chance to resolve his condition. Back then, Zhongxian had also had a Grand Intermittence Pill forged for Wei Ruyan in order to restore her physical health. Thank you, Wu Shi. Upon seeing the pill, Vice Principal Tan Qing's eyes lit up in excitement. He had already spent 2 years as a cripple, and there was no way he could turn down an opportunity to regrow his severed limbs. He swiftly took the jade bottle and corked it open. There was exactly 1 Grand Intermittence Pill inside, but its tier wasn't too high, having only achieved formation. Consuming the pill, an incredible surge of vitality immediately gushed through his body. In that instant, Vice Principal Tan Qing felt an incredible itch overwhelming his body. The severed stumps of his limbs began to slowly grow out, but before they could form complete limbs, everything abruptly came to a halt. Vice Principal Tan Qing shook his head bitterly and said, "The Grand Intermittence Pill can indeed resolve my condition, but the tier of the pill here is simply too low. Furthermore, as my limbs were severed by the Skyleaf King, there is still some of his killing intent lingering there that hinders the regrowth of my limbs. It seems like I won't be able to recover for the time being." The Grand Intermittence Pill contained an immense amount of vitality that allowed for the regrowth of a limb, but Vice Principal Tan Qing was simply too severely wounded. A single pill wouldn't suffice for his recovery. I only have 1 pill here. Wu Shi frowned. The Grand Intermittence Pill was extremely valuable, such that it would be extremely difficult to find even one of it in the markets of Qingyuan conferred empire. Even Wu Shi had to pay a heavy price in order to procure one, and he hadn't too willing to use it due to its immense value. However, who could have thought that even the seemingly miraculous pill wouldn't be enough to bring about Vice Principal Tan Qing's recovery? I have forged the Grand Intermittence Pill before. If we have sufficient medicinal herbs here, we can try forging it. Zhongxian said. Forge it right here? I should have most of the medicinal herbs required for its forging within my storage ring at the moment, but I am still lacking the main ingredient, Grand Intermittence Grass. Wu Shi said with a frown. Grand Intermittence Grass is simply too rare, I don't have any of it here either. Guild leader Han shook his head. Zhongxian could only smile bitterly upon seeing this sight too. The Grand Intermittence Grass was a rather elusive medicinal herb. Back then, he had to specially apply for one from the Qingyuan Empire Apothecary Guild in order to forge the Grand Intermittence Pill. Even though he had obtained quite a few good stuff from slaying the otherworldly demon kings, there wasn't any Grand Intermittence Grass in their storage rings. Actually, there is a Grand Intermittence Grass right in this Saint Ascension Hall. At this moment, Vice Principal Ji Yang suddenly spoke up. There's one here. The crowd was taken aback. Yuan, didn't I say earlier that Kongsha has left quite a fortune behind here so that those of the later generations can successfully achieve a breakthrough to become a celestial saint? It happens that there is a Grand Intermittence Grass amongst the fortune he has left behind. Back then, I secretly sneaked into the area to take a look, so I am confident of it. However, the area is currently dominated by the Skyleaf King. Vice Principal Ji Yang said. Hearing those words, bitter smiles emerged on the lips of the crowd. If the Grand Intermittence Grass was just lying around the area, they could still secretly head over there while the Saint Ascension platform was emanating its sacred light and retrieve it. However, if the Skyleaf King were to keep it with him, it would nigh impossible for them to lay their hands on it. Regarding the fortune you spoke about, where is it stored? I can secretly head over to take a look. If I could sneak away the grand intermittence grass while I am at it, Vice Principal Tan could be relieved from his suffering. Zhong Xian said. Hearing those words, Wu Shi and the others frowned. That's too dangerous. The Skyleaf King is bound to be in the vicinity. Let's think of another way instead. Indeed. The Skyleaf King is a leaving Aperture Realm expert, so there's no way you will be able to stand against him. Furthermore, just like us, he's bound to have installed all kinds of formations and mechanisms in his base so as to prevent us from assaulting him while his guard is down. If you were to head over recklessly and get caught in one of his traps, there's no way that we will be able to save you. Vice Principal Ji Yang added. Don't worry, I have my means. Besides, I will just be taking a look. I will only grab the grand intermittence grass if I spot an opening, or else, I will return straight away. Rest assured, I am not so foolish as to challenge the Skyleaf King head-on. Zhong Xian said. This. The crowd glanced at one another hesitantly. Wu Shi opened his mouth once more to dissuade Zhong Xian from the matter, but before he could speak, Zhong Xian had already interjected, Don't worry. Even if I am captured by the Skyleaf King, I do have some means of my own to escape from him. All right then. Seeing how confident Zhong Xian was, Wu Shi eventually relented. All right, I will be heading out first then. After Vice Principal Ji Yang pointed out the directions, Zhong Xian left the room with a reassuring smile, and after making a few turns, he disappeared from everyone else's eyes. This. Wu Shi, it's too reckless to have him go on his own. He can't possibly deal with the Skyleaf King himself. Vice Principal Tan Qing couldn't help but speak up worriedly. He didn't want others to lose their life in the midst of saving him. Vice Principal Ji Yang also shared the same thoughts as well, and he couldn't help but pace around the room anxiously. Well, I do think that it's a little reckless as well, but if you were to know about Principal Zhong's accomplishments in his battles with the otherworldly demons, you will probably think that he just might succeed as well. Knowing that they would respond in such a manner, Wu Shi replied. Accomplishments? What accomplishments? The duo looked at him curiously. Since you have been together with the Skyleaf King for so long, I believe that you should have heard of the 10 great kings of the Qingtian lineage, right? Wu Shi asked. Of course. They are said to be experts on par with the Skyleaf King. Every single one of them wield incredible strength that could easily devastate any Tier 1 empire. They are truly frightening existences. Vice Principal Ji Yang nodded. Indeed. Most of them possess strength on par with me, some superior even. But single-handedly, Principal Zhong. At this point, a helpless look appeared on Wu Shi's face as he continued. Managed to slaughter the other 9 of them. Chapter 1077. He managed to slaughter the other 9 of them. Are you sure you aren't messing with us? Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing widened their eyes in shock. Over the past 2 years, they had pitted their wits, courage, and strength against the Skyleaf King day after day, and they were on the verge of being driven mad from all of that, but they were still unable to faze the latter in the slightest. On the contrary, the number of master teachers on their side was slowly growing fewer and fewer, such that only the both of them were left. Yet, that fellow, a nascent saint cultivator, encountered the remaining 9 of the 10 great kings and managed to slaughter all of them. Was that for real? Not only so, Wu Shi continued, on one occasion, the Skyleaf King was hidden a fragment of his primordial spirit among our expedition team, and he ended up nearly being crippled by Principal Zhong. Thus, I feel that as long as he proceeds carefully, it might just work out. In fact, I am wondering that if we place him and the Skyleaf King in the same room, would he just happen be the one to walk out from the room alive? This. For a very long time, Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing found themselves unable to speak a word at all. They glanced at one another for a very long while before they finally found their words once more. Just what kind of principal did the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy nominate this time around? All this while, due to Zhong Xian's young age, they had thought that it was infeasible for him to become the principal. After all, there were bound to be more experienced and qualified master teacher who could hold the fort much better than him. However, after hearing the latter's accomplishments, Probably not even Zhong Inqiu could match up to the latter. While the crowd were still in the midst of a shock in the small room, Zhongxian had already arrived at the vast lobby of the Saint Ascension Hall. There is no doubt that I will be found if I head there in my current form. I should switch to my soul instead. With a swift movement, Zhongxian found a remote corner before drawing his soul out from his glabella. After which, he stored his physical body in the myriad ant hive nest before placing the ant hive nest into his storage ring. If he were to head there with his physical body, it would be very easy for the Skyleaf King to notice him, and it would be difficult for him to escape as well. He would be in a much safer position in his soul form. At leaving Aperture Realm, the Skyleaf King's spiritual perception was probably strong enough to easily discern everything in his surroundings, but spiritual perception wasn't an ability that one could constantly maintain. As the saying goes, even the wary tiger occasionally rests. As long as Zhongxian sneaked in while the other party had his guard down, it would not be too difficult for him to sneak the grand intermittence grass away. Thus, Zhongxian's soul began discreetly heading to where Vice Principal Ji Yang had pointed out earlier. Not too long later, a chamber appeared before his eyes. Just like the room that Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing dwelled in, the chamber had all kinds of grade 7 formations constructed around it. If an ordinary man were to step into it, he would find himself losing his sense of direction in an instant. However, Zhongxian was a 7-star pinnacle formation master himself. As complex as the formations were, they were not sufficient to keep him at bay. After maneuvering nimbly around the formations, Zhongxian soon arrived at the entrance of the chamber. He secretly took a peek in. The chamber was extremely spacious, and it was permeated with concentrated spiritual energy. Innumerable treasures were laid out neatly around the room, reminiscent of a massive treasure vault. Most of them were medicinal herbs, pills, books on how to achieve a breakthrough to Saint Realm, and the sort. In comparison, there were very few weapons in the chamber, or perhaps even none at all. It seemed like Kong Shi had really put quite some effort into preparing the room so as to ensure that the later generations would have a celestial saint of their own as well. The Skyleaf King actually isn't around. Zhongxian activated his Eye of Insight and scanned the room, and upon realizing that the Skyleaf King was nowhere to be found, his eyes lit up in excitement. I should move quickly. Zhongxian was still in the midst of thinking up a countermeasure for how he should enter the room if the Skyleaf King was within. However, since the latter was not around, there was no need for him to restrain himself. Grabbing his storage ring tightly, he carefully entered the chamber in his soul form. Medicinal herbs took up the bulk of the treasures within the chamber. All in all, there were at least several hundred types of saint herbs within the room. Despite being stored in the chamber for innumerable years, they had not lost their medicinal properties as a result of aging. Instead, under the nourishment of the concentrated spiritual energy in the area, they were becoming more and more potent. However, one thing that Zhongxian swiftly noticed was that there was a unique formation sealing away every single one of the medicinal herbs, preventing anyone from coming into contact with them. It's no wonder the Skyleaf King didn't store the medicinal herbs into the storage ring. He probably has no way of breaking these seals, Zhongxian thought internally. The seals were built in a manner similar to the seal in the subterranean gallery. Master teachers could pass through the seal with relative ease, but otherworldly demons weren't able to do the same. In other words, despite having guarded the chamber and watching over these medicinal herbs for 2 years, the Skyleaf King was still unable to obtain a single one of them. Otherwise, even with the suppression from the sacred light, he still should have made significant advancement in his cultivation through consuming the precious medicinal herbs in the room. If I wish to obtain the medicinal herbs, it will need to be in my body. Thus, Zhongxian swiftly drew his physical body out from the myriad ant hive nest before returning his soul to it. He stretched his stiffened body for a while before turning his gaze toward the medicinal herbs and books around him. Most of the books detailed the various methods of how one could achieve a breakthrough to Saint Realm. He had already collected many of those and compiled a correct version of the Saint Ascension decipher, so there was no need for him to collect any more of them. Saint Void Heartgrass, Heavenly Dragon Flower, Wood Scent Stalk. While these medicinal herbs aren't particularly high-tiered, they possess the ability to induce a metamorphosis of one's soul and physical body, thus making them ideal medicinal herbs to push for a breakthrough to Saint Realm. After a swift scan around the chamber, Zhongxian nodded. The medicinal herbs within the room were all useful in one way or another in achieving a breakthrough to Saint Realm. It was probably with the differing needs that different cultivators would have when attempting a breakthrough in mind that Kongsha prepared an entire room of medicinal herbs within the Saint Ascension Hall. Soon, a certain medicinal herb appeared in Zhongxian's sight. As expected, there's indeed the grand intermittence grass here. The grand intermittence grass could nourish a person's vitality. If paired with suitable medicinal herbs, it could metamorphose a cultivator's physical body into the flesh of a true saint. That being said, it would be rather extravagant for one to use such a precious medicinal herb for a breakthrough to Saint Realm. I should quickly take it first. With a swift movement, Zhongxian's hand reached for the seal to grab the medicinal herb. Wang. As soon as his hand came into contact with the seal, he immediately felt a powerful force pushing him back, stopping his hand from stretching any further in. If he could not touch the grand intermittence grass, he would be unable to store it within his storage ring. If so, he would have made a wasted trip. Humph, I don't believe that I can't overcome a mere seal. Seeing that the seal only served the purpose of hindering his movements, Zhongxian harumphed coldly as he increased his strength, causing his muscles tighten. Jeji, Jeji. The seal dented inwards like a crushed ball, and the deeper the dent, the greater the resistance Zhongxian felt. That's weird. Despite increasing the strength exerted several times, such that his zhenqi and physical strength were already pushed to their limits, he was still unable to touch the grand intermittence grass. Frowning, Zhongxian was just about to retract his arm and try again when he realized that the seal had bound itself tightly to his arm like glue. No matter how he struggled, he could not free himself from it. What a bizarre formation. Zhongxian did not know whether he should cry or laugh in this situation. Other formations were dangerous and lethal, but this seal, when he tried to push his arm in, it tried its hardest to keep him out. Yet, when he tried to retract his arm, it ended up sticking onto him, not allowing him to leave. Given the current situation, it seemed like he would be trapped until he successfully retrieved the grand intermittence grass. Soul. Since his zhenqi and physical body were not sufficient for him to reach the medicinal herbs, he had no choice but to drive his soul energy as well. Wang. As Zhongxian further increased the force he exerted, energy ripples spread across the seal as it gradually grew more and more dented. Zhongxian's zhenqi cultivation had reached nascent saint pinnacle, his physical body had achieved the fifth incandescence of the quintuple incandescence golden body, and his soul had reached nascent saint pinnacle as well after being nourished by the lightning elemental orb. With the three powerful sources of strength stacking upon one another, not even a Saint 3-den expert would be able to stand their ground against him. Jia. Go in. Due to Zhongxian driving his zhenqi too quickly, steam was rising from his head. There was a brief standstill between Zhongxian's hand and the seal as the both sides depleted the strength of one another. Eventually, after 2 minutes, Zhongxian's hand finally overcame the seal and touched the leaf of the grand intermittence grass within. Hu. He swiftly stowed it into his storage ring. Voila. As soon as the medicinal herb was stored into his storage ring, a loud popping sound echoed from the seal as it abruptly vanished from sight. It was as if the seal had become worthless with the disappearance of the medicinal herb inside, so it chose to dissipate of its own accord. While Kongsha has left behind a huge collection of medicinal herbs for the later generations, it seems like he has set up a trial around them so that they would only be used by those who are qualified. Without sufficient strength, it's impossible for one to retrieve the medicinal herbs. If I'm not mistaken, the seal automatically adjusts its durability according to the cultivation realm of the person attempting to retrieve medicinal herb, so it would be nigh impossible for cultivators who are beneath or beyond nascent saint to obtain it. This serves as a measure to ensure that the medicinal herbs would be used for breakthroughs to saint realm, as well as to ensure that the nascent saint cultivator retrieving and using the medicinal herb is qualified to be conferred as a celestial saint. Zhongxian thought as he wiped away the sweat on his forehead. As expected of the world's teacher, he sure had everything well thought out. It seemed like Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing were unaware of this matter, which resulted in them attributing the Skyleaf King's rise in strength to the medicinal herbs. Speaking of which, The Skyleaf King sure was pitiable. Despite having so many valuable medicinal herbs around him, he was not able to obtain even a single one of them. It would be good to obtain all of these medicinal herbs, but it's simply too difficult to draw them out. It'd be best for me to leave with just the grand intermittence grass for the time being. Otherwise, once the Skyleaf King returns, I'll be in deep trouble, Zhongxian thought as he exhaled a mouthful of turbid gas. Of course, it would be for the best if he could obtain all of the medicinal herbs in the room, but that would be extremely dangerous as well. He dared not imagine what would happen if the Skyleaf King were to return while he was in the midst of retrieving one of the medicinal herbs. Thus, Zhongxian turned around, and just as he was about to leave the room, his eyes suddenly fell upon a certain peculiar object. It was a gel-like fluid that emanated a radiance of 7 colors. Flowing slowly within the seal that it cased in, it exuded a peculiar aura that seemed to draw him in. This. Could it be 7-colored earth jade essence? Zhongxian's breathing hastened as his entire body stiffened in shock. His Saint Ascension decipher required one last artifact for him to achieve a breakthrough from nascent saint to saint realm, and that was the 7-colored earth jade essence. After browsing through innumerable records, he had learned that the 7-colored earth jade essence only sprouted in the very depths of the earth veins, making it an extremely rare commodity, such that even the author of the book had not seen it before. As such, there were no descriptions on the artifact in the book. Even so, he felt a peculiar feeling of intimacy to the 7-colored fluid. Furthermore, considering that it had been left behind by Kongsha himself, without a doubt, it was definitely the 7-colored earth jade essence. With this, I should have no trouble becoming a celestial saint. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly in agitation. Without any hesitation, he dashed forward and reached his hand into the seal. This was an artifact that he had to obtain regardless of the cost. He had already been at nascent saint pinnacle ever since he left the subterranean gallery, and it had been a long time since then. As long as he could assimilate the 7-colored earth jade essence, he would finally be able to reach Saint Realm. Jeji. Driving his junchi, physical strength, and soul energy to their limits, the seal casing the 7-colored earth jade essence immediately dented inwards. Humph, for pesky rats, you sure scrambled fast. Zhongxian, you'd better pray that you don't meet me ever again, or else I will tear you apart into innumerable shreds. Just as Zhongxian was in the midst of pushing his hand into the seal to obtain the 7-colored earth jade essence, a cold harumph abruptly sounded outside. Following which, a towering figure walked into the chamber. The Skyleaf King. He pushed open the door while mumbling furiously beneath his breath. As soon as he got into the room, he immediately noticed that something was amiss. Scanning the room swiftly, he found a hand plunged right into one of the seals, and attached to the hand was a young man who was trying his best to struggle free. You. Many emotions flickered across the Skyleaf King's face. From the initial bewilderment, it slowly warped into shock before eventually turning into rage. Clenching his fists tightly, he was just about to rush forward to make a move when the young man suddenly raised his free hand and waved. Yo. Chapter 1078, Pose, and you will be struck by lightning. Actually, Zhongxian was also having a mental breakdown at that very moment. He had not thought that the Skyleaf King would walk in on him. With his hand trapped within the seal, he could not leave even if he wanted to. It was truly an indescribably awkward situation. Yo! Hearing the other party's bizarre greeting, the Skyleaf King was taken aback. Upon seeing him, not only did the other party not flee from fright, he was even speaking some kind of weird language to him. The sheer ridiculousness of the situation left him slightly dazed. However, it took only a blink of an eye for him to recover from it. You are trapped within the seal? Ha ha ha. It seems like even the heavens are on my side. Not only did that fellow foil his plan, the fellow had even humiliated him, the first king of the Qingtian lineage. Ever since then, he had been wanting to exact vengeance. He had thought that the other party would surely coop himself up in the small room like the other pesky master teachers, and if that was the case, there would truly have been nothing that he would have been able to do. However, who would have thought that the other party would be so foolish as to wander right into his base? He truly must have been eager to seek death. He had studied the seals for 2 whole years, and he knew that once a hand touched the seal, it would be impossible to extract it unless one were to obtain the artifact within it. Judging from the other party's current state, he must have been trying to retrieve something but got stuck in the midst of doing so. Ha ha ha. Since you are already here, why don't you just remain here for good? With his eyes glowing in excitement, the Skyleaf King reached out to grab Zhongxian. But before his hand could reach the other party, the young man suddenly spoke up. Hold it a moment. Why? Are you going to plead for mercy now? Let me tell you this straight, it's too late for that. Knowing how scheming the young man before him was, the Skyleaf King formed a massive palm with Zhenqi and directed it straight toward the other party. As a Saint 5 Dan leaving Aperture Realm expert, he wielded astounding strength. Even with the combined prowess of guild leader Han and Wu Shu, they would still be beaten into a lump of meat before the palm strike, let alone Zhongxian. Plead for mercy? You must be joking. Do you think that I'll plead for mercy with a lowly figure like you? Do you know who I am? Zhongxian looked at the Skyleaf King fearlessly as an aura of majesty flowed from him. Who are you? You are the principal of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, the only one in history to have received the recognition of everyone within the academy. As long as I devour you whole, I will surely be able to achieve a breakthrough in my cultivation and escape from this darned place. The Skyleaf King roared furiously as a savage glint flashed across his eyes. Otherworldly demons were able to raise their cultivation through devouring the flesh of master teachers. Back then, Vicious Phalange 1 had fed off the bodies of the master teachers that the beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge had offered him, and through doing so, he was able to regain his strength and regrow his flesh. The higher ranked and more talented a master teacher was, the more an otherworldly demon's cultivation would grow by consuming him. For a very long time now, the Skyleaf King had been wanting to kill Zhongxian and devour him. Since Zhongxian had trapped himself within his base, how could he possibly allow this delicious prey to escape from him? Audacious. Zhongxian's face darkened. Driving his Heaven's Path Zhenqi, he swiftly converted it into the chilling Zhenqi of slaughter unique to otherworldly demons. Within the blink of an eye, a powerful aura burst into the surroundings. I am Pilipala. Before Zhongxian could finish speaking, a powerful current of electricity abruptly ran through the hand that was trapped in the seal. In just a brief moment, his entire body was charred black from the powerful lightning current. His entire body stiffened under the electrocution, and his hair also stood up from the lingering static electricity. If not for his body having achieved durability comparable to a Saint Low-tier artifact, he might have just died then and there. Zhongxian's eyes flew around the place, and he nearly burst into tears. All he wanted to do was pose for a bit so as to fool the Skyleaf King. Was it really that big a crime? To actually be electrocuted over such a small matter? As stifled as Zhongxian felt, he swiftly understood what was going on. Just as he had guessed previously, otherworldly demons were indeed unable to retrieve the artifacts within. The moment he converted his Heaven's Path Zhenqi into Zhenqi of slaughter, the seal assumed that an otherworldly demon was attempting to breach its defenses, so it immediately sent a powerful electric shock over. It was fortunate that Zhongxian had converted his Zhenqi back as soon as he noticed that something was amiss, or else even his Saint Low-tier body would not have been strong enough to survive a sustained electric shock of that intensity. How embarrassing it would have been if he had died from an electricity shock while he was in the midst of posing. You! The Skyleaf King was just about to make a move when he suddenly saw Zhongxian being charred black before his eyes, and he froze in shock. For an instant, he vividly felt a killing intent being emanated from the young man before him. It was weak, but it was even purer than his own. Furthermore, he was even electrocuted by the seal on top of that. Could it be that the young man before him was not a master teacher but one of their tribesmen? Cough cough. You should know my identity now, right? Exhaling a mouthful of white smoke, Zhongxian turned to the Skyleaf King and spoke confidently. You are also an otherworldly demon as well? The Skyleaf King frowned for a moment before a glint flickered in his eyes. No, that's not right. You are a master teacher. How could a person who has received the acknowledgement of so many master teachers possibly be an otherworldly demon? Ah. You must have killed the Scarlet Leaf King and the others and drawn the Junchi of slaughter from their bodies through some secret art. Do you think that you can beguile me through a cheap ploy like that? Dream on. Boom. The Sky Leaf King immediately gathered his strength once more and launched a palm strike against Zhongxian. It was not without reason that he had managed to surpass innumerable otherworldly demons to become the #1 expert of the Qingtian 10 Great Kings. He was indeed not as easily fooled as the other kings. While the Junchi of slaughter was unique to the otherworldly demons, it was not entirely impossible for the fellow before him to have extracted the Junchi of slaughter from the other kings and stored it within his body so as to disguise himself as their tribesman. Back then, a certain master teacher had used such a method to deal a crushing blow to them. You said that I killed the Scarlet Leaf King? Ha ha ha. You were fooled by that as well? That was just a ploy that I used to fool them. Take a look at who is this. Zhongxian flicked his wrist, and a figure appeared beside him. The fellow had a towering stature and a powerful body. Upon seeing the Skyleaf King, the fellow smiled and said, "It's me." He was the Scarlet Leaf King. "You aren't dead yet." Seeing how the young man trapped in the formation had dragged out a living Scarlet Leaf King, who should have been ripped into pieces within a Grade 7 pinnacle slaughter formation, the Skyleaf King found himself completely lost for the first time. What was going on? Back then, even though his fragmented primordial spirit had suffered a heavy blow, he did not leave the premises immediately. With his own eyes, he had watched the Scarlet Leaf King being tricked by the young man, and trapped within the formation that he constructed himself, he was torn into innumerable pieces. How in the world did he come back to life? No, something is wrong. The Junchi of slaughter within your body does not belong to the Scarlet Leaf King. Furthermore, your cultivation isn't right either. After a moment of bewilderment, the Skyleaf King swiftly found a few points that were off about the Scarlet Leaf King before his eyes. The Scarlet Leaf King before him did harness Junchi of slaughter as well, but it had an ancient quality to it. This was at odds with the cultivation technique practiced by the Scarlet Leaf King. More importantly, there was a significant difference in their cultivation as well. The Scarlet Leaf King before him was only at nascent Saint Pinnacle, not having even reached Saint Realm yet. One should know that the Scarlet Leaf King was a true half-leaving Aperture Realm expert. In order to fool those master teachers, I had no choice but to take a fatal blow. As a result, my cultivation ended up suffering a temporary decline. Well, if you still don't believe me, surely you should recognize this guy, right? The frowning Scarlet Leaf King explained. There was a momentary blur before the Skyleaf King's eyes, and another figure abruptly materialized in the chamber. It was the missing Violet Leaf King. Paying respects to the Skyleaf King, the Violet Leaf King hurriedly clasped his fist and bowed deeply. The frown on the Skyleaf King's face deepened. There was nothing wrong with the Violet Leaf King before his eyes. The other party's cultivation realm and aura were exactly how he remembered them to be. For both the Scarlet Leaf King and the Violet Leaf King to be with him, could Zhongxian really be one of their tribesmen? While it looked as if he had killed the 10 great kings on the surface, he was, in fact, saving them all? Recalling the incident from before, the Skyleaf King asked doubtfully, "No, that's not right either. If you are truly one of our tribesmen, why would you reveal my hidden identity to those master teachers?" His fragmented primordial spirit had been hiding within Jiang Yuan all along, and with his secret art, no one would have noticed him. Yet, the other party forced him out of Jiang Yuan's body and put him through great suffering. If the other party was truly an otherworldly demon, why would the other party have betrayed him? Not even Feng Zun, Jiang Yuan's close companion, had noticed the anomaly. It was all to obtain the trust of those foolish master teachers so that I could obtain the map. Zhongxian replied with a leisurely wave of his hand. However, as his entire body was still charred from the previous electrocution, his leisurely movement looked sinister instead. "You have obtained the map from them?" The Skyleaf King was taken aback. "Indeed. It's in my hands right now." Zhongxian nodded, and he flicked his wrist. A map appeared in his hand. "It really is the map." Feeling the unique aura that emanated from the ancient goatskin resonating with the entire Qiu Wu Palace, the eyes of the Skyleaf King lit up. The map had a distinctive quality reminiscent to the booklet that contained the introduction to the ancient domain. There was no doubt about it, it was the real map. The Skyleaf King reached out to take the map in agitation. "Can you let me take a look?" "Who?" With another flick of his wrist, Zhongxian returned the map into his storage ring and shook his head. "With this, you should know who I am, right?" "This." Seeing Zhongxian keeping the map, the Skyleaf King was stunned for a moment before asking with a deep frown, "Who in the world are you?" All of the evidence suggested that the young man before him was an otherworldly demon, but he did not know of any figure within the Qingtian lineage who possessed such pure zhenqi of slaughter. Zhongxian waved his hand. "It's not convenient for me to tell you who I am at the moment. You just have to know that the Qingtian Emperor dispatched me to assist you in this mission. His Majesty sent you here to assist me." The Skyleaf King assessed the fellow before him once more. The zhenqi in his body felt upright, and the faint air of a master teacher lingered around him. No matter how he looked at the fellow before him, the other party did not seem to have anything to do with the otherworldly demonic tribe. "Indeed. All right, I will have to obtain this artifact now, so stand back a moment. I will talk to you once I'm done." Seeing that he had finally convinced the Skyleaf King a little, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief as he pushed his other hand further in to touch the 7-colored earth jade essence. "Obtain the artifact." The Skyleaf King was stunned for a moment before a ferocious glint flashed through his eyes. "Do you think that you can fool me with your cheap acting? Tell me, who are you?" "Fool you? Why would you think that I'm trying to fool you?" Seeing how the other party was still reluctant to believe his words, Zhongxian felt a little headache. If it had been any of the other kings, they would have been sold by now. Yet, the Skyleaf King just would not believe him despite all of the evidences he had produced. Wasn't he being a little too skeptical? "I have no way of ascertaining who you truly are, but the seal that Kongsha left behind is surely able to do so. If our otherworldly demonic tribe truly had a way to bypass Kongsha's detection, we wouldn't have been in vulnerable position all along." Sneering coldly, the Skyleaf King gathered his zhenqi within his palm once more, ready to make a move. The fact that the fellow was only electrocuted once while his hand was stuck within the seal was conclusive evidence that the other party wasn't an otherworldly demon at his core. Without a doubt, he was a fake. "You." Hearing those words, Zhongxian immediately panicked. "Exposed, huh? Regardless of whether you are truly a human or an otherworldly demon, you won't be getting out of here alive today." With a cold sneer, the Skyleaf King raised his palm to bring it down upon Zhongxian. At that moment, however, he suddenly felt a splitting pain cutting into his head. Pang! His head abruptly burst apart, and his body was sent crashing into a nearby wall before collapsing back to the ground as if a lump of mud. The Scarlet Leaf King slapped his hand as the muscles throughout his body warped back into Zhongxian's appearance. "I told you from the start, we could have just killed him with a single punch. There was no need to waste your breath. You sure like to create more trouble for yourself, don't you?" Chapter 1079. What are those things? Naturally, the Scarlet Leaf King was Zhongxian's clone. His clone and he were mentally connected, so they could easily transmit their thoughts to one another. Earlier, in order to fool the Skyleaf King, Zhongxian had instructed the other party to morph into the Scarlet Leaf King's form. As his clone cultivated a simplified version of the Heaven's Path divine art, he was unable to fully disguise his zhenqi to that of the Scarlet Leaf King nor conceal his level of cultivation perfectly, thus resulting in the Skyleaf King seeing through his clone's disguise easily. Back then, his clone had said that they shouldn't waste their time with the Skyleaf King, and they should just end him with a single punch. However, Zhongxian felt that there was too huge of a disparity between their strength, so it was best for them not to move recklessly. Even so, his clone still ended up striking the Skyleaf King anyway. It was truly fortunate that the Skyleaf King hadn't really thought that anyone would be so brazen as to attempt an assault on him, and his clone also moved at a speed beyond the Skyleaf King's expectations, so the Skyleaf King ended up being struck in the head and died just after a single punch. Upon seeing this sight, Zhongxian couldn't help but fall in a daze. The Skyleaf King's strength was centered on his primordial spirit, making his physical body significantly weaker in comparison, but nevertheless, he was still a leaving aperture realm expert. With his body reinforced by his powerful zhenqi, it would be difficult for anyone wielding strength beneath Saint Four Dan to inflict harm to him, even with a successful surprise attack. Yet, his clone actually managed to destroy the other party's head with a single punch. That was far beyond the might that he harnessed within his physical body, zhenqi, and soul combined. If he were to challenge his clone in his current state, there was no doubt that he would be utterly destroyed. Was that fellow really still his clone? To think that his rate of cultivation and fighting prowess would end up being so far beneath his own clone. At this rate, he dared not claim that he was a genius anymore. How did you become so strong? Zhong Xian couldn't help but ask. The gap was between them wasn't that huge previously. At the very least, he was still able to stand his ground against his clone to some degree in the past. But if he were to clash with his clone once more in the latter's current strength, just the thought of it sent shivers down his spine. Could it be that his rate of cultivation was actually really slow? You gave me the lightning elemental orb not too long ago. I thought that it was quite useful, so I absorbed it a little. His clone began explaining with a proud look on his face when a loud explosion suddenly sounded from behind. Following which, a furious roar echoed resoundingly within the chamber. Shit, the Skyleaf King is a leaving aperture realm expert. Even with his physical body destroyed, his primordial spirit would still be intact. Zhong Xian suddenly recalled the distinctive traits of leaving aperture realm cultivators, and his eyes widened in horror. Leaving aperture realm cultivators were capable of drawing their primordial spirits from their physical bodies and operate independently from it. Even if their physical bodies were to be destroyed, it wouldn't affect their fighting prowess by much. Since the Skyleaf King was a true leaving aperture realm expert, the same applied to him as well. In other words, they weren't out of danger yet. If anything, they were in greater danger than before. While Zhong Xian was speaking with his clone, his hand hadn't been idling about. Noticing the urgency of the situation, he immediately drove his zhenqi, physical strength, and soul energy to the maximum, such that he could feel a sharp pain acting on his meridians and muscles as they were pushed to the verge of tearing apart. Capture. The seal dented deeper and deeper inwards, and eventually, Zhong Xian's finger finally came into contact with the seven-colored earth jade essence. He quickly kept it into his storage ring. Who? The seal swiftly dissipated, freeing his hand. I will kill you. Hulala. Along with a furious roar, a primordial spirit flew over with reddened eyes. Even without making a move, just the pressure it was exerting already left one feeling as if the world was being torn apart. Strong. Zhong Xian's heart turned cold. Even though he had encountered and even fought with a handful of primordial spirits in the past, none of them could begin to compare up with the one standing before him at this very moment. If the primordial spirit of the Jadeleaf King could be said to be a ferocious cat, the Skyleaf King would definitely have to be a ferocious tiger. They weren't even at the same level. Just by the pressure itself, he could already tell that even with 10 of him combined, he still wouldn't be a match to the other party. That fellow really only knows how to cause trouble. I should never let him out again. If he hadn't destroyed the Skyleaf King's head, I might still be able to stall for some time. But this. What should I do? With his life hinging on a thin thread, Zhong Xian couldn't be bothered with anything else anymore. He swiftly rushed for the exit as he cursed his clone in his mind. Had his clone not acted so recklessly and destroyed the Skyleaf King's head, the Skyleaf King also wouldn't have gotten so furious. He had only barely managed to flee from the seal, but at this rate, it wouldn't be long before he was captured by the Skyleaf King once more. Clone, you were the one who caused this trouble. You should take responsibility and fend him off. Zhong Xian bellowed furiously, but before he could finish his words, he suddenly saw something that caused his eyebrows to shoot up. Hey, don't go. Wait a moment. With a speed even faster than him, his clone had already dashed out of the room, leaving only his back visible to him. Who could have thought that his clone would actually be so disloyal, fleeing at a speed even faster than him? Zhong Xian nearly died from sheer anger on the spot. He had known all along that his clone was not a reliable teammate, but he had never thought that it would be to such an extent. However, this wasn't a moment to dwell about the matter. Knowing that he would die if the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit were to catch up with him, he quickly flicked his wrist, and the lightning elemental orb appeared in his palm. That was currently the strongest trump card he had at the moment. As long as he could activate it, he would be able to generate a field of lightning, which could possibly stall the Skyleaf King for some time, thus opening a small window for him to escape. That being said, it was nigh impossible for him to activate the lightning elemental orb given his current level of cultivation, but considering the current circumstances, he had no other choice but to give it a try. Lightning. Grabbing the orb tightly, Zhongxian infused Zhenqi into it furiously. Halfway through his words, a loud catcher sounded, and the orb was reduced to dust. Zhongxian was speechless. He was still thinking how his clone had gotten so powerful within such a short period of time. It turned out that he had fully absorbed the lightning harnessed within the lightning elemental orb dry, emptying out the precious artifact. Damn it! Realizing that he had lost his greatest trump card, Zhongxian was on the verge of tears. Watching as how the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit was swiftly catching up to him, he felt despaired. He was just about to give himself up to death's embrace when he suddenly felt a burst of wind rushing past him. He turned around to take a look, and to his shock, the Skyleaf King had ran straight past him, as if the other party hadn't seen him at all. Ah! Zhongxian was stunned. As a large figure standing in the middle of the room, there was no way that the Skyleaf King would have missed him. So, why did the Skyleaf King run straight past him? Nevertheless, since the Skyleaf King had chosen to overlook him, Zhongxian grasped the opportunity and swiftly kept the Violet Leaf King back into the myriad ant hive nest before rushing out of the chamber. Stepping out of the chamber, he saw his clone facing the Skyleaf King with a mocking look on his face not too far away. His clone wagged his finger provocatively while speaking in a resounding voice, "If you really think that you can defeat me, come at me then." Zhongxian widened his eyes in shock. Could it be that, after absorbing the lightning elemental orb, my clone's cultivation has already reached leaving Aperture Realm and could defeat the Skyleaf King? If that's the case, I won't need to escape anymore. Zhongxian had thought that his clone was being disloyal for running away, but it turned out that the other party was actually luring the Skyleaf King out to face the latter one-on-one. From the looks of it, his clone seemed to have gained the ability to defeat the Skyleaf King face-on. There was no need for him to worry anymore. "You're courting death." The Skyleaf King roared as he flung a fist forward furiously. The clone also swiftly retaliated with a punch of his own. My clone is actually facing the Skyleaf King head-on. Seeing how his clone was valiantly charging at the Skyleaf King, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He opened his eyes wide to see who would emerge victorious from the clash, only to see that before his clone's fist could even come close to connecting with the Skyleaf King, the Skyleaf King's fist had already fallen on his head. Pada. His clone's head was knocked flat. Pu. Zhongxian's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets, and he almost blacked out on the spot. Aren't you supposed to be powerful? To be destroyed within just a single blow? Where in the world did you find the courage to behave so arrogantly before the Skyleaf King? He is intentionally luring the other party so that I can escape. Zhongxian was dazed for a moment before realization came to him, and he couldn't help but feel a little moved. Despite how his clone usually acted, it seemed like he was still a trustworthy ally during crucial moment. Deciding not to waste the other party's selfless sacrifice, he quickly dashed away. Reanalyzing the situation, while his clone's fighting prowess had increased significantly after absorbing the energy within the lightning elemental orb, he was still far from matching the Skyleaf King. The only reason why his clone had challenged the Skyleaf King so arrogantly to his face was so as to buy some time for him to get away. What a noble clone! At this moment, Zhongxian felt deeply embarrassed that he misunderstood the kind intentions of the other party. With reddened eyes, he swiftly dashed back towards the room where Wu Shu and the others were at. Barely after he took 3 steps, a figure with a flattened head abruptly sprinted past him while shouting, "Main body, you will have to deal with him yourself, I am not a match for him. Also, Skyleaf King, you should stop pursuing me. He's the real Zhongxian, I am only a clone." Zhongxian's body shook as he spurted blood. So, in the end, the fellow was just trying to posture, but it ended in a failure. Zhongxian swiftly took a glance behind him and saw that the Skyleaf King was looking at him with reddened eyes. Don't come for me, he's the real Zhongxian, I am just a clone. When have you seen a clone escaping faster than the main body? Zhongxian immediately backed away fearfully. I will kill you first before killing him. With a look of savagery, the Skyleaf King roared angrily as he rushed towards Zhongxian. Voila! An incredible might tore through the air, but surprisingly enough, despite standing before such devastating might, Zhongxian didn't show the slightest hint of panic. Instead, his lips curled up into a faint smile. You want to kill me? Give it your best shot then, the young man replied calmly as he stomped his feet on the ground. Wang! With a loud buzz, the formations that were set up around the chamber came to life. In the blink of an eye, a dense layer of mist shrouded the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit. Zhongxian had already examined the formation closely when he first arrived, and with his clone's help, they were able to successfully lure the Skyleaf King into the formation and trap him within it. He's the one who had set up the formation, so there's no way the formation can kill or trap him for too long. Let's go. While Zhongxian was able to activate the formation to trap the Skyleaf King temporarily, given the Skyleaf King's deep understanding of those formations, it would be nigh impossible for him to kill the other party through it. Thus, he chose to make use of this opportunity to swiftly return back to where Wu Shu and the others were instead. I will kill you. Jeji. Jeji. Shortly after Zhongxian left the formation, a series of loud explosions sounded behind him. The formations trapping the Skyleaf King had been torn into pieces. Those Grade 7 pinnacle formations could easily trap Vice Principal Ji Yang and the others, but against the leaving Aperture Realm Skyleaf King who commanded a thorough understanding of them, it could only barely last for a few moments. On top of that, the formations required a person of sufficient strength to drive it in order to draw out its true strength, but Zhongxian's nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivation wasn't insufficient for him to drive a Grade 7 pinnacle formation properly. Run! With the formations being torn apart, Zhongxian knew that he would be killed if the Skyleaf King caught with up. Thus, he pushed his body to its limits and dashed forward as fast as he could. What an incredible pulsation of energy. This is bad. The Skyleaf King must have noticed Principal Zhong, and the both of them have started fighting with one another. The crowd, who were resting within the small room, felt an intense disturbance in the surrounding spiritual energy, and their eyes narrowed in alarm. Let's go out to take a look. Wu Shu said anxiously before taking the lead to head outside. The others quickly followed suit, and not too long after leaving the room, they saw a monster with a flattened sheet dangling on his neck sprinting over. Behind him was a person whose entire body was charred black and hair was standing on end. What are those things? The crowd was horrified. Chapter 1080. I want to become a celestial saint. Due to the huge commotion outside, everyone thought that the Skyleaf King had noticed Zhongxian and a battle had broken out among them. Yet, when they headed out, they found two monsters running in their direction instead. What was going on? Weren't they the only ones in the Saint Ascension Hall? Wait. No, those are not monsters. Take a closer look. The charred man behind is Principal Zhong. Guild leader Han suddenly noticed something, and he gulped subconsciously. Look at his clothes, they are identical with Principal Zhong's. It's just that, he seems to have been struck by lightning. You're right, his Principal Zhong. But if that's the case, who's the flat-faced fellow in front? Wu Shu asked in bewilderment. The fellow with the flattened face in front was dressed in the same clothes as Principal Zhong, and their figures were identical as well. But, surely a person whose face had been crushed flat should have died, so how could he still be running about? Not to mention, the speed he was running at was astounding at that. Even Principal Zhong was unable to keep up with him. I will kill you all. Just as Guild leader Han and Wu Shu were perplexed by the bizarre situation, a towering primordial spirit suddenly appeared around the bend behind the duo. While chasing the duo, the primordial spirit was launching attack after attack, causing huge palm prints to appear on the ground amid intense tremors. That's the Skyleaf King. He has drawn out his primordial spirit. This is really bad, we must quickly move to save them. Upon seeing this sight, Wu Shi and the others did not have the luxury of time to slowly figure out who the duo was anymore. They quickly drew their weapons and rushed forward to save them. Huala! Rise! Along with Wu Shi's bellow, the swords in everyone's hand gathered together to form a grand rain of swords directed toward the Skyleaf King. How dare you hinder my path? Scram, or else I'll claim your lives. Roaring frenziedly, the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit burst forth to deflect the rain of swords with a powerful slap. Deng 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 deng. The incredible might of the Skyleaf King's slap caused Wu Shi and the others to retreat 8 steps. That single strike had left their zhengqi running in disarray, and their faces paled from the impact. Even before the Skyleaf King had drawn out his soul, they were already no match for him. Given that the Skyleaf King had gone on a rampage, drawing out his primordial spirit to face them, they stood even less of a chance. Nevertheless, even though their attack did nothing to injure the Skyleaf King, they did succeed in slowing down the Skyleaf King's advancement, thus buying Zhongxian and his clone sufficient time to reach them. Quick, get back into the formation. Knowing that the crowd could very well lose their lives if they were to clash with the Skyleaf King, Zhongxian hurriedly shouted as he continued rushing toward the formation. The crowd also knew that they did not stand a chance against the Skyleaf King with their current strength either, so they hurriedly stepped back into the formation. The moment Zhongxian managed to reach the formation, he heaved a huge sigh of relief. Turning his gaze to the figure with a flattened face not too far away, his eyebrows shot up in displeasure. If not for the fact that he did not stand a chance against his clone, he would have taught the latter a lesson. In the first place, his clone was the one who had acted recklessly and landed both of them in trouble. Despite that, not only did his clone not offer himself to save him, the main body, he even fled faster than him. You should return back to the anthive nest first. I will settle this with you later. Knowing that this was not the time to be fussing over such matters, Zhongxian waved his hand and had his clone return to the myriad anthive nest. Wang. Right after he did that, a light buzz sounded. Vice Principal Ji Yang had already successfully activated the formation, and a brilliant light shrouded the area. They had set up this formation in order to fend off the Skyleaf King's assault, and after numerous uses over the past 2 years, they were already very familiar with it. As such, they were able to activate it instantaneously. Being blocked outside the formation, the Skyleaf King furiously roared, "Damn you! Damn all of you!" Shortly after, the crowd heard a loud thud on the formation. An intense force reverberated through the formation, threatening to shatter it apart. We won't last long at this rate. After several strikes from the Skyleaf King, the face of the one driving the formation, Vice Principal Ji Yang, blanched, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. It was not like the Skyleaf King had never attempted to breach the defenses of their formation before, but this was the first time he had launched such frenzied attacks. If it continued, it was just a matter of time before the formation broke apart. There are only the few of us around here, so originally, the Skyleaf King wouldn't kill us before finding a path to escape. After all, the chances of finding a plausible escape path are greater if there are more of us around. For him to suddenly go into a rampage. Zhongshe, just what did you do? Vice Principal Tan Qing frowned as he turned his gaze toward the charred young man not too far away. Just how in the world did he manage to provoke the Skyleaf King into drawing out his primordial soul and rushing at them as if he had gone berserk? All I did was destroy his body, Zhongxian replied awkwardly. His clone could hide back in the myriad anthive nest after causing so much trouble, but he couldn't do the same. In the end, he was the one who had to clean up the mess made by the other party. The more he thought about it, the more exasperated he felt. Destroy his body? You mean, you killed his physical body? Everyone was stunned. They were still thinking that it was ridiculous for the Skyleaf King to go so far as to chase Zhongxian in his primordial spirit just because he had stolen a stalk of grand intermittence grass from him. But who would have thought that Zhongxian actually destroyed the other party's physical body, leaving Aperture Realm cultivators were capable of surviving as primordial spirits, but they would still have to take good care of their own body as it was the resting place for their primordial spirits, and it was also the foundation for them to further their cultivation. Given so, there was no one who wouldn't go into a frenzy after having their body destroyed. I also didn't notice it. It was an accident, really. Seeing the horrified expressions on the faces around him, Zhongxian quickly explained himself. If he had managed to stop his clone from acting so recklessly back then, they would not have been placed in such a desperate situation. Accident. Everyone's face reddened in frustration, and if they could, they would have really liked to give the fellow before them a good pummeling. In the first place, it is already tough enough for a nascent saint cultivator like him to destroy the body of a Saint 5 Dan expert, and he was saying that it was all an accident. If that was the result of an accident, wouldn't the world be destroyed if he acted intentionally? Taking a few deep breaths, Guild Leader Han suppressed the vexed emotions in his heart and spoke grimly. Forget it, this isn't the time to be thinking about that. We have to find some way to stabilize the formation quickly, or else we might all lose our lives here. He was the head of the Qingyuan conferred Empire Formation Master Guild, and his comprehension of formations was extremely deep. He could tell that while the formation was still managing to keep the Skyleaf King at bay temporarily, the situation wouldn't last for too long at the current rate. To prevent that, all of them would have to devote their strength to reinforcing the formation together. All right. Knowing the urgency of the situation, the others quickly nodded. Wu Shu, head to the Qian position and stand guard there. Luo Shu, head to the Zhen position. Guild Leader Han quickly distributed various roles among the group. He had been studying the formation ever since he arrived at the room, so he had an idea of where the weaknesses of the formation were located. Noting that there was nothing wrong with Guild Leader Han's deployment, Zhongxian decided to just follow his instructions. Hong Long. As everyone infused their zhenqi into the formation simultaneously, the formation seemed to have stabilized significantly, alleviating the tremors. Damn it! Noting the changes in the formation, the Skyleaf King quickly realized that he wouldn't be able to breach the formation even if he exerted his full strength. Trembling with rage, he roared, "Since you wish to coop in your hole like tortoises, I will crush that statue." Who? Shortly after those words were shouted, everyone felt the immense pressure acting on them disappearing. It seemed the Skyleaf King had left. He has gone to deal with Principal Zhong Inqiu. What do we do? Stepping out of the formation, the group realized that the Skyleaf King had indeed left. Realizing what the other party was going to do next, Vice Principals Ji Yang and Tan Qing could not help but panic. Clearly, the statue referred to the old principal beside the Saint Ascension platform. The old principal's soul was currently sealed within the statue, so he could not flee even if he wanted to. Faced with the Skyleaf King, the only plausible fate for him was death. Even though the old principal was currently trapped within a statue, he had consciousness and was capable of speaking. Surely they couldn't watch idly as their close comrade was killed by the Skyleaf King? What else can we do? We can only save him. Wu Shu replied gravely. But, there's no way we will be able to stop the Skyleaf King, Vice Principal Tan Qing said worriedly. The Skyleaf King was simply too powerful. Even with their might combined, they were still no match for the other party. If they were to rush over recklessly, not only would they be unable to save the old principal, their team might even be wiped out at that. I'm sorry, but I can't simply watch idly as a comrade dies right before my eyes. Even at the expense of my life, I want to at least try to save him. Master teachers never abandon their own brethren. Wu Shu clenched his fists in agitation. It goes without saying that we share the same feeling as well, but, what can we do? Vice Principal Tan Qing shook his head and sighed deeply. It was in order to save me that Principal Zhong Inqiu landed himself in such a state. If we charge in recklessly and lose our life in the midst of saving him, we will only be undermining the sacrifice he made for us. He would surely blame us for acting foolishly. Having followed Zhong Inqiu for many years, Vice Principal Tan Qing had a clear grasp of the other party's temperament and character. Unmarried, Zhong Inqiu had devoted his entirety to the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy and his responsibilities as a master teacher. Even if they were to succeed in saving Zhong Inqiu at the expense of their own lives, they would only make the other party guilt-ridden for being a liability to the team. Is there any way we will be able to defeat the Skyleaf King? Zhongxian asked with a frown. There is a way. As long as someone achieves a breakthrough on the Saint Ascension platform, we will be able to call forth the energy within it and enter a temporary state of invincibility. With the temporary state of invincibility, we will be able to overwhelm the Skyleaf King easily, Vice Principal Ji Yang said. Temporary state of invincibility? Zhong Xian asked. Indeed. We have been studying the stone tablets on the first floor over the past 2 years, and according to the records left behind by Kongsha, if a cultivator successfully becomes a celestial saint, a burst of sacred light will descend from the sky. At the same time, the energy harnessed within the Saint Ascension platform will be infused into the cultivator's body. As the energy harnesses the authority of the world, not even 9-star master teachers will be able to stand their ground before it, Vice Principal Ji Yang replied. In the 2 years that they were trapped in the area, other than pitting their strength and wits against the Skyleaf King, they had also been looking into how they could escape from the Saint Ascension Hall as well. As such, they had been looking around the area whenever they had chance to do so, and they had managed to find quite a few records that were related to the Saint Ascension platform. At this point, it seemed like there were only 2 solutions to escape from the Saint Ascension Hall. Firstly, obtain the heritage of ancient sage Qiu Wu. Secondly, be conferred as a celestial saint on the Saint Ascension platform. The first solution was no longer feasible. The fragmented soul of ancient sage Qiu Wu had already dissipated from being excessively traumatized, so there was no way they could obtain the heritage anymore. In other words, their only hope lay in the second solution. That's as good as not saying anything at all. Celestial saint. How could it be that easy? Wu Shi shook his head. Shortly after hearing those words, the young man stepped up, and with determination in his eyes, he said, "How about this? Let's head to the Saint Ascension platform, and the rest of you will try to find ways to stall the Skyleaf King so as to prevent him from laying his hands on the old principle. In the meantime, I will attempt to achieve a breakthrough to Celestial Saint on the Saint Ascension platform." Since he had already obtained the 7-colored Earth Jade Essence, he was ready for a breakthrough to Saint Realm. With his powerful accumulation and deep comprehension of the Saint Ascension decipher, there was at least an 80% chance that he could become a Celestial Saint. At this moment, it seemed to be the only plausible way to stop the Skyleaf King and save the remaining soul of the old principle. Becoming a Celestial Saint is not as easy as you think it is. You really should drop the idea. Seeing how the other party raised the topic once more, Vice Principal Ji Yang frowned in displeasure. He had already told the other party about the matter previously, and it was only out of politeness that he had not hurled criticisms at him. And yet, the other party was going on about it once more. Do you think that celestial saints are like cabbages in the market, available upon demand? Stop overestimating yourself. The displeased Vice Principal Ji Yang was just about to continue when the presence of the young man before him abruptly changed, and an inviolable aura abruptly burst forth from him. Hong Long. That aura created a warm glow around the young man, portraying him as a deity. This is Celestial Master Teacher. Upon sensing the aura, Vice Principal Ji Yang's criticisms were stifled in his throat. His eyes narrowed, and his body stiffened. Chapter 1081. Exchange. It was previously said that the requirement to becoming a celestial saint was to be a celestial master teacher. But other than Kongsha, there was not a single person in the entire master teacher continent who had managed to receive the acknowledgement of the heavens and become a celestial master teacher. As such, they had always thought that it was all a pipe dream, a solution that could never come to be. Thus, when they felt the aura the young man before them was emanating, they fell into a daze. Zhongsha was actually a celestial master teacher? Vice Principal Ji Yang was not the only one who reacted in such a manner. Other than Luo Ruoxin, the remaining members of the group also had their mouths widened in shock, as if they had seen a ghost. They knew that Zhong Xian was a person who possessed unparalleled talent and outstanding leadership, but who would have thought that he was actually a real celestial master teacher? It was no wonder ancient sage Qiu Wu dissipated in shame. His standing could be said to be on par with even Kongsha himself. Retracting the aura around him, Zhong Xian turned to Vice Principal Ji Yang and asked, "So, am I qualified to become a celestial saint?" "Oh, of course." Vice Principal Ji Yang hurriedly replied with quivering lips. At this point, how could he dare say no? If even celestial master teachers were unable to become celestial saints, it would be impossible for anyone else to do it. Seeing that he had managed to convince everyone, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Let's move quickly then. Otherwise, once the Skyleaf King lays his hands on the old principal, it'll be too late for regrets. If the group continued dawdling around due to their lack of confidence in his ability to become a celestial saint, the old principal would probably be dead before they could take any concrete action. With a life at stake, he could only reveal his identity so as to win them over. Besides, once he became a celestial saint, the others were bound to learn about his identity as a celestial master teacher as well. Since that was going to be the case, it made no difference whether he revealed it to them now or later. And judging from the crowd's reaction, it seemed like he had made the right call as well. All right, let's set off right now. Zhongxian nodded. All right. The crowd quickly made their way toward the roof of the Saint Ascension Hall once more. The Saint Ascension platform was not releasing any sacred light at the moment, so the Skyleaf King could access the area freely as they wished. They would have to make haste. Hong Long. As soon as they arrived at the rooftop, they saw the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit grabbing the old principal's soul. The statue the latter was housed in before had already been reduced to fragments. Upon seeing the crowd, the old principal immediately exclaimed anxiously, "Don't come over, I am already a dead man. There's no need for you to make unnecessary sacrifices for me." Even though he had never cultivated soul arts before, his soul was still able to stabilize significantly due to the sustained nourishment from the sacred light over time. As such, the destruction of the statue did not dissipate his soul instantaneously. "Shut up." With a tap of the Skyleaf King's finger, the old principal's voice immediately vanished. With a cold gaze in his eyes, the Skyleaf King turned to the crowd and said, "I thought that master teachers were all spineless cowards who feared death." What a surprise! Seeing that Zhong Yinqiu's soul was tightly grasped in the Skyleaf King's hands, Vice Principal Tan Qing clenched his jaws and said, "Let go of our principal." As the leader of the Qingtian 10 Great Kings, a leaving Aperture Realm expert, don't you think that it's beneath you to deal with a powerless soul? Beneath me? Huh. If it wasn't for that, do you think that this fellow would have been able to live to this day? The Skyleaf King replied with ferocity. Trapped within the statue, Zhong Yinqiu was unable to leave the rooftop of the Saint Ascension Hall at all. There were various intervals in which the Saint Ascension platform did not emanated sacred light, and the Skyleaf King could have easily made use of such intervals to kill Zhong Yinqiu. The reason he had not done so was out of consideration of his standing, and just as Vice Principal Ji Yang and the others had guessed, it would also be harder for him to find a way to escape if all of the master teachers were killed. Furthermore, Zhong Yinqiu posed no threat at all, and in his current form, living would only be more painful than death. "What do we have to do for you to release the old principal?" Zhongxian asked with a deep frown. Judging from how the Skyleaf King had yet to make a move after all this while, it was apparent that he was intending to use Zhong Yinqiu as leverage to negotiate with them. "Simple. Hand over that fellow who beat me up along with the map, and I'll let him go. Otherwise, you will have to watch helplessly as his soul dissipates into nothing." As the Skyleaf King spoke about the person who had beaten him up, his voice grew visibly colder and angrier. This was the first time that someone had successfully managed to pull off an assault against him since becoming the #1 expert of the Qingtian 10 Great Kings. To make matters worse, his head was utterly crushed, thus rendering his physical body completely useless. Just the thought of it left him so furious that he could explode on the spot. "The fellow who beat you up?" Zhongxian blinked his eyes blankly. He had thought that the Skyleaf King would use Zhong Yinqiu as a leverage to claim his life, but who could have known that his hatred for his clone far exceeded his? But thinking about it, that was to be expected. After all, his clone had destroyed the other party's body in a single hit, so it was only natural that the other party was filled with antagonism for his clone. "Indeed. Hand that fellow over with the map, and I will release Zhong Yinqiu," the Skyleaf King nodded. "Very well. We can hand them over to you, but you must swear to the spirit god that not only will you not kill the old principal, you are also not to lay your hands on us in the next 24 hours. Zhongxian said. Otherwise, if you go after us right after we save the old principal, that would render the exchange completely meaningless. Considering that Zhongxian had the 7-colored earth jade essence in his hands, it would not take long for him to achieve a breakthrough on the Saint Ascension platform. As long as he could prevent the Skyleaf King from attacking them for the time being, he would be able to successfully become a celestial saint and slay the latter. The Skyleaf King was taken aback. "You know of our spirit god?" Swearing to the spirit god was an extremely sacred and solemn ritual of their otherworldly demonic tribe. A vow that was sworn to the spirit god could not be broken, or else the spirit god would claim one's soul as forfeit. "Why? You dare not agree to our request?" "That's fine as well, but you need not dream about obtaining the map either. Let's all die here together. We're all trapped here anyway, so it's only a matter of time before you join us in the underworld." Noting the Skyleaf King's hesitation, Zhongxian immediately pushed his case on to topple the scales in his favor. The Skyleaf King contemplated for a long while before he eventually nodded. "All right then, I will make a vow to the spirit god. Let's begin then." Flicking his wrist, Zhongxian took out an altar of the otherworldly demonic tribe. It was the one that he had obtained from the hands of the Jade Leaf King. Seeing how thorough Zhongxian was, the Skyleaf King realized that it would be impossible for him to dupe the other party, and he sneered coldly, "You sure are well prepared, aren't you? Fine, I shall make a vow to the spirit god here." Hong Long. Innumerable treasures appeared on top of the altar, and as the Skyleaf King began speaking in a foreign tongue, the items began burning up. Jeji. Jeji. All of a sudden, the sky suddenly turned pitch black, and a massive door materialized right above him. Everyone's body stiffened in the presence of the door. There was an inconceivably powerful aura that was being emanated from within the door. Before such massive power, it felt as if even cultivators of their strength could be torn into shreds with just a mere thought. Standing before such power, Zhongxian's heart also skipped a beat. Back then, the Jade Leaf King had only utilized the altar to verify Feng Zun's identity as a celestial master teacher, so the door had not appeared. He had not thought that the Skyleaf King's vow would call upon such a fearsome existence. Who? The door slowly opened, and a silhouette came into view. It was a mere silhouette, but its very presence left the crowd feeling as if their souls would burst at any moment. If the existence were to really descend upon this land, would the master-teacher continent be destroyed? Inside the door was completely dark, making the silhouette extremely vague. However, through his eye of insight, Zhongxian was still able to catch a decent glimpse within the door, and a deep frown emerged on his forehead. That silhouette. Where have I seen it before? However, before he could give the matter much thought, the Skyleaf King suddenly began making his vow, dragging Zhongxian's attention away from the silhouette. "I, the Skyleaf King, vow in the name of the spirit god that as long as I am given the map and the offender who destroyed my body, I will immediately release Zhong Yinqiu and not harm him and his comrades within the next 24 hours. If I ever break this vow, may the spirit god claim my life and soul as forfeit." Huala. Right after those words were spoken, a brilliant ray of light burst forth from within the door and fell right on his head, entering his mind. It seemed to be confirmation that the spirit god had accepted the vow. Who? After that was done, the door slowly dissipated from existence. With a slightly pale look on his face, the Skyleaf King turned to Zhongxian and asked, "How is it? I have already made my vow, so can you believe me now?" Zhongxian nodded. He was just about to take out his clone and map when Wusha's voice suddenly sounded in his ear via Zhenqi telepathy. "Something is not right, everything seems to be proceeding too smoothly. Don't you think that the Skyleaf King has accepted our request too quickly? He even willingly made a vow to the spirit god at our request. Could there be a trap somewhere?" Zhongxian nodded in agreement. "There's definitely a trap somewhere." Given the Skyleaf King's superior cultivation, he was in an advantageous situation compared to them. Yet, he still chose to accept to their terms without much hesitation or bargaining. It was truly hard to believe that the other party was not up to something given this bizarre situation. Then, Wusha frowned. "The old principal is currently in his hands, so we have no other choice but to go along with it. Besides, he might have his trap, but we have our own trump card as well. As long as we can stall for some time, I will be able to successfully become a celestial saint and slay him, thus resolving the situation once and for all, Zhongxian replied telepathically. Considering that they were in a disadvantageous situation, it was already a huge blessing that the Skyleaf King was willing to accept their terms. Even if there was trap hidden somewhere, they had no choice but to leap right into it. Knowing that the Skyleaf King was definitely up to something, Wuxia felt a little reluctant to go ahead with the plan. However, he also understood that there was no other path they could take at the moment. If the Skyleaf King really made a move against them, they would not be able to stop him. Hurry up, don't test my patience. Where is that fellow and my map? The Skyleaf King said impatiently. They are over here. Without much hesitation, Zhongxian flicked his wrist, and his clone appeared beside him. Since his clone was the one who had landed them in the current predicament, it was only natural that he should take responsibility for the matter as well. In any case, his clone was forged out of the Nine Hearts Lotus, so even if he were to be pummeled into a flat pancake, even with the incredible strength the Skyleaf King wielded, Zhongxian did not think that the other party was capable of killing his clone. At this moment, his clone had already recovered from his flattened face. In order not to shock the others too much, Zhongxian had his clone alter his appearance to that of Sun Qiong's in the ant hive nest before coming out. "He's the fellow who laid his hands on me earlier." Seeing a fatty whom he did not recognize appearing before him, the Skyleaf King frowned doubtfully. Indeed. He's capable of disguising himself. He was the one who disguised himself as the Scarlet Leaf King earlier, too, Zhongxian replied. Very well. With hatred and wrath in his eyes, the Skyleaf King raised his hand, and an immense might immediately wrapped itself around Zhongxian's clone. With a powerful tug, the Skyleaf King pulled the clone over to his side, holding the latter hostage. After grabbing hold of his clone, the Skyleaf King did not rush to exact vengeance on him. Instead, he turned to Zhongxian once more and asked, "What about the map?" "It's over here." Zhongxian stretched out his hand, and an ancient goatskin sheet materialized above his palm. Floating calmly, it emanated an historic air around it. Honestly speaking, the map was not much use at all. So far, all it had done was form a rainbow bridge that allowed the expedition team to bypass the Celestial Palace and enter the Qiuwu Palace. If the Skyleaf King really wanted it, there was no harm in handing it over to him. "Give it to me." A look of fiery desire swiftly flickered across the Skyleaf King's eyes as he anxiously stretched his hand forward. "All right." With a flick of his finger, Zhongxian passed the map over to the Skyleaf King. Woo! Woo woo! Woo woo woo! Seeing that the map was about to fall into the Skyleaf King's grasp, the silenced Zhong Yinqiu panicked. He tried to say something, but the binding that the Skyleaf King had cast over him prevented him to speaking a word. "Good. All right, I'll return this one to you then." With a light push, the Skyleaf King tossed Zhong Yinqiu's soul toward Zhongxian and the others. Zhongxian and the others hurriedly rushed forward to catch Zhong Yinqiu's soul, and Wuxia quickly relieved Zhong Yinqiu of his bindings. As soon as the binding was released, Zhong Yinqiu immediately said anxiously, "The map concerns the possession of the ancient domain. We cannot let him gain possession of it." "Ha ha ha, it's too late." Standing in midair with the map in his grasp, the Skyleaf King's excited voice boomed in the area, and the Saint Ascension Hall abruptly began shaking intensely. Chapter 1082. You are blocking me from watching Zhongxian pose. Boom. With a smooth motion, the map in the Skyleaf King's grasp opened up, and the Saint Ascension Hall suddenly began shaking intensely. In fact, the shaking seemed to extend to the Qiuwu Palace and even beyond. An enormous power seemed to be gushing from the depths of the ground, and it felt as if something frightening was about to surface. Feeling the powerful aura, everyone's face warped in horror. The aura was simply too powerful. The Skyleaf King was already an opponent that was nigh impossible for them to deal with previously, but before this aura, they felt that they did not even stand a sliver of chance. Zhongxian's eyes narrowed. This is the aura of the subterranean gallery's seal. He had felt such a sensation from the seal in the subterranean gallery before. Vast and powerful, it felt like something no being could never hope to stand against. Jeji. Jeji. The aura grew more and more powerful, and eventually, at the summons of the map, a massive sphere slowly burrowed out of the ground. Similar to a crystal ball, the sphere was transparent. Zhongxian could not tell what it was made of, but the sheer power harnessed within it could easily crush all of them. Seeing the abrupt twist in circumstances, Wu Shi hurriedly asked, Zhong Yinqiu, what is going on? It's the map. With a pale face, Zhong Yinqiu spoke with despair in his eyes. Map? Doesn't the map only serve to point out a safe path through the ancient domain? Wu Shi asked with a frown. They had seen the map when Zhongxian had it, and all it had done for them so far was create a bridge that led them into the true Qiuwu Palace. Other than it, it seemed to serve no practical purpose at all. Point out a safe path? Zhong Yinqiu shook his head. It's far more important than that. That map is actually the key to Qiuwu Palace. Inscribed on it are the words of the ancient gods and a unique spatial formation. Once it fuses with the sphere, the map will be able to store the entire Qiuwu Palace within it. Store the entire Qiuwu Palace within it. The crowd was startled. On your way here, you must have realized that Qiuwu Palace is actually a folded space. The sphere over there is the core of Qiuwu Palace. It serves to regulate the energy within it and stabilize the space. The map serves as the key to controlling the sphere. Once the sphere fuses together with the map, the entire Qiuwu Palace will become a painting, similar to the Celestial Palace outside. If that happens, not only will the Skyleaf King gain possession over all of the treasures that ancient sage Qiuwu and Kongsha have left behind, we will also be trapped within the painting, and the Skyleaf King would be able to deal with us as he pleased. Zhong Yinqiu said anxiously. This. Everyone's body jolted in shock. The reason they were so helpless before the Scarlet Leaf King back when they were within the Celestial Palace was because they were trapped within the painting, whereas the Scarlet Leaf King was outside the painting. The old principal was right. Once the Skyleaf King successfully fused the sphere together with the map, the entire ancient domain would be his to control. If that truly happened, they would be in deep trouble. Back then, on top of leaving behind his heritage for master teachers, ancient sage Qiuwu has also created the map and entrusted it into trustworthy hands so that those who require its strength would be able to use it in times of crisis. Those who possess the map can fuse it together with the sphere, and that would grant them complete control over Qiuwu Palace. If the Skyleaf King truly gains possession of Qiuwu Palace, even without the heritage, he would still be able to analyze and reverse engineer the structure of the seal. Once he succeeds, the otherworldly demonic tribe will be able to send their armies into the Master Teacher continent, and mankind will be in for a tough fight. It is also for this reason that I rushed over as fast as I could to stop him, having thought that the Skyleaf King had already obtained the map. Upon hearing those words, everyone came to a realization. Previously, Zhongxian had been thinking that since it was impossible for the otherworldly demonic tribe to obtain ancient sage Qiuwu's heritage, why did the old principal and the others still charge into the ancient domain to stop them despite knowing the huge risks it posed? At this moment, everything was finally clear to him. What do we do now? Wu Shi asked worriedly. They were currently in a race against time. If the Skyleaf King succeeded in fusing the sphere with the map, mankind could very well be facing a calamity on an unprecedented scale. There's only one thing we can do now: stop the map and the sphere from fusing together, Zhong Yinqiu said grimly. All right. Everyone replied grimly. Principal Zhong, you should go and attempt for a breakthrough first. Leave the Skyleaf King to us, Wu Shi said. All right. Zhongxian nodded. He knew that given his current strength, he would not be of any help for the others in their fight against the Skyleaf King. Since that was the case, it was better for him to focus on achieving a breakthrough. Once he succeeded, the current adversity they were in could be resolved easily. Not expecting the nascent saint cultivator to be thinking about breaking through at such a crucial moment, Zhong Yinqiu could not help but frown. Breakthrough? Even if a nascent saint achieves a breakthrough to Saint Realm, it still won't make a difference to the current plight we are in. Don't worry, Principal Zhong Yinqiu. It's not any ordinary breakthrough that he's going for, Wu Shi replied with a soft chuckle. After which, he took in a deep breath, and his eyes suddenly grew solemn. With an abrupt leap, he charged swiftly toward the Skyleaf King as if a streak of lightning. Sla! Knowing that his opponent wielded strength far beyond him, Wuxia used a secret art right from the get-go, forcing his body to exert a might far beyond his current limits. Wait for me. Guild leader Han also swiftly leaped up to support Wuxia. In an instant, the two Saint 4 Dan experts immediately began clashing with the Skyleaf King. Had it been any other occasion, the Skyleaf King's primordial spirit would be more than able to subdue the both of them with a single palm strike. However, at that moment, he had to devote a portion of his strength and focus to facilitating the fusion of the map and the sphere, so his strength had been reduced significantly. As a result, a stalemate had actually arisen from their clash. Not any ordinary breakthrough that he's going for. On the other hand, Zhong Yinqiu knew that he would not stand a chance against the Skyleaf King in his current form, so he turned his gaze toward Zhongxian doubtfully instead. Just what kind of breakthrough was the latter going to achieve for Wuxia to say such words? However, this doubt did not last for too long in his mind, as he soon saw Zhongxian walking toward the Saint Ascension platform. The Saint Ascension platform was protected by an extremely powerful seal, making it nigh impossible for anyone else to approach it. Yet, for some reason, the seal displayed an exceptional intimacy toward Zhongxian, opening up a path for him to pass through without any hesitation. A thought surfaced in Zhong Yinqiu's mind, and his eyes widened in shock. The seal opened up for him? Could it be? Could it be? Celestial Master Teacher? In terms of their understanding of Qiuwu Palace, there was no one there who could rival Zhong Yinqiu. There was only one possibility for the seal to open up a path voluntarily for one to pass through. The person had met the requirements to become a celestial saint. In other words, the young man before him was actually a celestial master teacher, Hong Long. Before his shocked gaze, the young man before him took a seat on top of the Saint Ascension platform. With a flick of his wrist, a seven-colored fluid materialized before the young man. That is, the seven-colored earth jade essence. Zhong Yinqiu exclaimed. As rare as the seven-colored earth jade essence was, it had a rather distinctive and unique appearance. Those who had heard of it before could easily recognize it. On the Saint Ascension platform, Zhongxian held the seven-colored earth jade essence in one hand while tapping on it lightly with the forefinger of his other hand. In the next instant, the seven-colored energy harnessed within the fluid swiftly seeped into the many acupoints throughout his body. Jeji, Jeji. A resounding echo sounded, and Zhongxian's aura began surging swiftly. In the blink of an eye, he had already overcome the limitations of nascent Saint Pinnacle, heading toward a far greater level. Such incredible power. Is he really just attempting a breakthrough to Saint Realm? Zhong Yinqiu gulped subconsciously as he stared at the sight before him fixedly. Even though the young man before him was only attempting a breakthrough from nascent Saint to Saint Realm 1 Dan, the aura that he was emanating felt profound and unfathomable, as if one was staring into the deep abyss. Zhong Yinqiu had once witnessed a Saint 2 Dan achieving a breakthrough to Saint 3 Dan, but it paled greatly in comparison to what was happening before him. If anything, they were not even on the same level. Zhong Yinqiu could hardly believe his eyes. Is he really trying to become a celestial saint? The fact that Kongsha had made such preparations within the Qiuwu Palace showed that he had no doubt that there would surely come another celestial saint after him, but even so, Zhong Yinqiu still found it hard to believe that anyone could succeed in accomplishing that seemingly impossible feat. After all, there was only one Kongsha in the world. None could replace him, none could match up to him. Had the world not had Kongsha, the ancient times would have been bleak like the onset of a long night. He's definitely going to. After all, that fellow knows of nothing but showing off. While Zhong Yinqiu was still caught in his state of disbelief, a slightly sour voice sounded beside him. Turning around, he saw that the fatty who had been exchanged for him had, at some point in time, taken a position beside him, his eyes fixated on the young man on the Saint Ascension platform as well. There was a deeply displeased look on his face, seemingly angered by the fact that the limelight had been stolen by the other party. You are bleeding from your 7 apertures one. Upon seeing the state that the fatty was in, Zhong Yinqiu's lips began twitching uncontrollably. If anyone were to bleed from their 7 apertures as profusely as the fatty was at the moment, they would surely have died near instantly. Yet, The fatty seemed to be completely unfazed by it. He continued looking at the young man on the Saint Ascension platform with his teeth gritted in envy. "Oh, it's actually nothing much once you get used to it," the fatty replied nonchalantly. "You can actually get used to bleeding from your 7 apertures?" Zhong Yinqiu nearly fainted on the spot. Just where in this world did this monster come from? While others were dying due to bleeding from their 7 apertures, this fatty was saying that it was fine once one had gotten used to it. "No, it's not just that." With twitching lips, Zhong Yinqiu continued speaking. "There's a sword stabbed into your back. I think it has pierced through your heart." If the fatty was only bleeding from his 7 apertures, he would not have been so surprised. However, there was a sword plunged into his back, and judging from the angle, it had pierced right through the fatty's heart. Was he really still fine despite being in such a state? "Pierced through my heart." Perplexed, the fatty glanced downward and saw the tip of a sword protruding from the front of his chest. His eyebrows shot up before replying nonchalantly, "Oh? I wouldn't have noticed it if you hadn't said so. However, that's not really an issue to be concerned over. It'll be fine once I pluck it out." After saying those words, the fatty bent his hand in an inconceivable angle to grab the sword behind his back and extract it. Tossing the extracted sword nonchalantly on the ground, he said, "There, it's done." Zhong Yinqiu was completely frenzied. The insanity that he had just witnessed made him feel as if the world had gone mad. Just what in the heck was the monster before him made of? How could he still be living despite being in such a state? Curses. "You sure are resilient, aren't you? Let's see if this can kill you." While Zhong Yinqiu was still overwhelmed by his shock, a wrathful bellow sounded from the sky. The next moment, the Skyleaf King threw a powerful palm down toward the fatty. Catcher. In the blink of an eye, the fatty was reduced to a flat lump of meat, glued to the ground. Horrified, Zhong Yinqiu subconsciously took numerous steps back with a pale face. It was just a moment ago that he was still speaking to the fatty, but the latter was suddenly reduced to a lump of meat the next moment. The striking visual was something that was hard for him to accept in a moment. "This young brother over here, rest assured. Even at the cost of my life, I will exact vengeance for you," Zhong Yinqiu said solemnly before turning his gaze toward the Skyleaf King with eyes reddened in killing intent. However, before he could even finish his vow, an impatient voice sounded from the ground. "What the heck are you mumbling there? Hurry up and step away, you are blocking me from watching Zhongshen pose." Alarmed, Zhong Yinqiu lowered his head, only to see that 2 eyes were staring at him impatiently from the lump of meat on the ground. Chapter 1083, Celestial Saint Ordeal R. Leaping up, Zhong Yinqiu nearly fainted from shock. If the other party was still living despite bleeding from the 7 apertures and taking a sword to the heart, he could at least still reason it as the other party possessing a secret art of some sort which allowed him to shift his heart away from its original position. But how could a person who was smacked into a lump of meat possibly still be living? More importantly, you said that I was blocking your path. Just how concerned are you with Zhongshe's posing? No, attempting a breakthrough that you are still so fixated on watching it despite being in such a state. Just as Zhong Yinqiu was rendered at a complete loss of words, another surge of sword chi flashed across the air. The Skyleaf King seemed to have noticed that the fellow was still alive and launched another wave of attack over out of fury. Catcher. Under the immense might of the Skyleaf King, the lump of meat was immediately split into 2 lumps as it wriggled relentlessly on the ground. "Why You should be dead this time around, right?" With quivering lips, Zhong Yinqiu couldn't help but ask. "You're the one who is dead, your entire family is dead." The 2 lumps of meat refuted furiously. After which, the 2 eyeballs on them turned towards the Skyleaf King and spat, "It's only out of consideration for your dignity that I chose to feign death here, and yet, you just have to persistently come for me time after time again. You are just asking to die, aren't you?" Hong Long. The 2 lumps on the ground merged back with one another, and in just a few moments, he had already reverted back to his original appearance as a fatty, as if he hadn't been injured in the first place. With a furious roar, he charged towards the Skyleaf King in the sky. Just like that, Zhongshen's clone joined the fray as well. However, it was apparent that the strength of Zhongshen's clone was far from matching up to the Skyleaf King. Shortly after leaping up, he was knocked back down into the ground with a single slap, reduced to a lump of meat once more. This time, before Zhong Yinqiu could even express his grief, the lump of meat gathered again once more and continued clashing with the Skyleaf King. Not only was Zhong Yinqiu dazed, even Wu Shi and guild leader Han were stupefied as well. Wasn't Principal Zhong's friend a little too absurdly resilient? It was as if his body was made of rubber, and nothing could faze him at all. How in the world did he manage to cultivate a body like that? A moment later, Wu Shi recovered from his shock and bellowed, "Let's go all out. We just have to keep him, stall him for a while." There wasn't any time for them to be surprised at the moment. No matter the cost, they had to prevent the Skyleaf King from successfully fusing the map and the sphere together. If the Skyleaf King were to succeed, they would all lose their lives here. The collaborative offense carried out by the numerous Saint Fordan experts brought forth a furious barrage of sword chi and junchi. Devastating shockwaves rippled into the surroundings, inflicting havoc upon everything that stood in its path. With an indestructible monster joining the battle, Wu Shi and the others were able to remain unharmed under the Skyleaf King's attacks for the time being. Seeing that the situation over there was stable for the time being, Zhong Yinqiu turned his sight back to the young man on the Saint Ascension platform and saw that the energy within his body was still increasing ceaselessly, as if the power he harnessed within his body was boundless. Just how much energy does he have in his body? Zhong Yinqiu couldn't help but be astonished. Any nascent saint cultivators in his place would have already expended their zhenqi by now and withered into dried jerky. Yet, the young man seemed to be completely unfazed by the massive energy consumption he was making. Just in terms of zhenqi reserve in itself, even 10 of him in his peak state couldn't compare to the young man. After watching the situation for a while, Zhong Yinqiu determined that they were still doing fine for the time being, and he heaved a sigh of relief. He was just about to turn his gaze back to the battle in the sky when he caught sight of a beautiful silhouette not too far away, and he frowned. "Luo Shi, why aren't you participating in the battle too?" The beautiful master teacher who had come along with Wu Shi's expedition team, Luo Shi, was currently standing nonchalantly on the spot, as if the battle that was going on in the sky had nothing to do with her. "I need to protect Zhongshen," Luo Shi replied calmly. "He's just attempting a breakthrough. With the protection of the Saint Ascension platform, he can't possibly be in any danger." Zhong Yinqiu frowned. "Even if your cultivation might be beneath the others, given that everyone else was putting their life on the line, shouldn't you at least be doing something? To say that you are protecting Zhongshe. Zhongshe is just attempting a breakthrough on the Saint Ascension platform. What could possibly happen to him?" Hong Long. Before Zhong Yinqiu could finish his words, the deafening rumbling of thunder abruptly sounded in the sky above. All of a sudden, pitch-black clouds appeared in the sky right above the Saint Ascension platform, and the destructive lightning energy harnessed within them threatened to lay waste to everything beneath it. "That is the leaving aperture ordeal? How can it possibly appear here?" Zhong Yinqiu widened his eyes in shock, and he nearly keeled over. It was said in the legends that when a primordial spirit realm cultivator attempted a breakthrough to leaving aperture realm, he would have to undergo a lightning ordeal. The trial would temper one's primordial spirit, making it more resilient. It was a necessary requirement for the primordial spirit to be able to exist independently of the body without dissipating. In a sense, it could be considered as a life-and-death trial in order to ascend to higher ranks. It was for this reason that even though there was only a small gap between primordial spirit realm and leaving aperture realm, there was a world of a difference in both of their fighting prowess. Only upon reaching leaving aperture realm could one be considered to have reached the upper echelons of the master-teacher continent. However, clearing the leaving aperture ordeal was no easy feat. There were many primordial spirit realm experts who would suppress their cultivation for several centuries for fear that their primordial spirit would dissipate under the devastating might of the lightning. This resulted in a disproportionately low number of leaving aperture realm cultivators as compared to primordial spirit realm cultivators. Considering that Zhongshe was a nascent saint cultivator attempting a breakthrough to saint realm, why would he be put through such a fearsome heavenly ordeal? Everyone wishes to become a celestial saint, but without sufficient strength, How could one obtain the acknowledgement of the heavens? Luo Shi remarked nonchalantly before taking a step forward. She glanced at the ominous clouds that shrouded the sky as she clenched her fists tightly together. A requirement to becoming a celestial saint is to prematurely undergo the leaving aperture ordeal. Upon hearing those words, Zhong Yinqiu gulped. He was incapable of sweating as a mere soul, but at this moment, he felt as if his back was drenched with cold sweat. Leaving aperture ordeal, this was a trial which innumerable half-leaving aperture realm in history had lost their life to. Given that Zhong Shi was only a nascent saint cultivator, how could he be able to endure it? Putting everything aside, Zhong Yinqiu could tell that even in his peak state, his body and soul would still dissipate at first encounter with the overwhelming lightning energy gathered in the sky above. This is not the leaving aperture ordeal but saint ascension ordeal. Those who wish to ascend to a celestial saint has to first undergo a trial to prove that they are worthy of becoming one. Luo Ruoxin's voice was impassive, but she was unable to conceal the deep worry in her eyes. He must overcome the heavenly ordeal with his own strength. We can only pray the best for him. Saint Ascension ordeal. While the others were shocked by the sudden arrival of the lightning clouds on the Saint Ascension platform, Zhongxian also came to realize what was going on, and a frown appeared on his face. It was no wonder why no one had succeeded in becoming a celestial saint in the past several dozen millenniums. There were bound to be a handful of astounding geniuses who were able to comprehend the secrets behind Kongshi's cultivation technique as well, but one who wished to don the crown had to bear the weight of it. Those who wished to become a celestial saint had to undergo the Saint Ascension ordeal to prove their worth. There was no way he would be able to overcome the lightning ordeal easily. Come. Zhongxian knew that it was impossible for him to avoid the lightning ordeal, and the only way he could succeed was to face it straight on. Thus, gritting his teeth tightly together, he opened up his pores, and spiritual energy in the surroundings began rushing into him like a whirlpool. At the same time, he lifted his gaze and stared right into the dark clouds above. Hong Long. Seemingly sensing Zhongxian's battle will, the lightning clouds in the sky couldn't hold themselves back any longer. A thick streak of lightning burst from the sky, headed towards the young man seated in the middle of the Saint Ascension platform. If one had to make a comparison between the field of lightning from before to the thick streak of lightning headed towards Zhongxian at this instant, it would be reminiscent of a young sprout standing before a towering, ancient tree. The both of them weren't even close to being at the same level at all. Before the lightning could even reach him, Zhongxian could already feel an incredible force threatening to eradicate his body and dissipate his soul. He felt that if his cultivation had been any lower, he wouldn't stand a chance against the streak of lightning at all. The Saint Ascension ordeal is divided into the soul ordeal, body ordeal, and heart ordeal, and each of them is more difficult than the previous. Luo Ruoxin said with a slightly anxious edge to her tone. It was impossible for others to intervene in this kind of ordeal. Not only would it not do any good, it might even trigger the wrath of the heavens, inducing the heavens to bring forth greater destruction to the world. Soul ordeal. Hearing Luo Ruoxin's words, Zhong Yinqiu frowned. He had learned a little about the process of becoming a celestial saint through the writings left by Kongshi around the Saint Ascension Hall. He thought that he had already grasped a thorough understanding of the matter, but at this moment, he realized that what he knew paled far in comparison to the young lady before him. The soul ordeal is the very first trial of the Saint Ascension ordeal, and it places the cultivator's soul through the tempering and cleansing of lightning. The slightest lapse in concentration in this phase can easily lead to one's soul dissipating entirely. Luo Ruoxin explained. The soul has to undergo the cleansing of lightning. Zhong Yinqiu shuddered in fear. As he was currently in soul form, he could vividly understand how much souls feared lightning. Lightning was the natural nemesis of all souls. Putting aside a lightning streak as thick as the one in the sky, even just the slightest electricity was unbearable to a soul. Zhongshi. I can only pray the best for you now, Zhong Yinqiu said as he looked at Zhongxian intently. Huala. As soon as the lightning seeped into Zhongxian's body, he immediately felt a burning sensation in his soul, as if someone had lit an inferno within it. His condensed soul immediately began flickering unstably, and it seemed as if it might dissipate at any moment. Pain. Zhongxian's face paled. The burning sensation came from the very depths of his soul, and it was so excruciating that he felt as if he could lose his mind at any moment. It was fortunate that he had tempered his soul through the lava and field of lightning while he was making his way through the ancient domain, or else his soul might have already dissipated by now. It seems like the various trials outside aren't chosen by random. Kongsha has intentionally designed it to temper the later generations so as to prepare them for a breakthrough to Celestial Saint. While enduring the excruciating pain of the lightning, an epiphany suddenly came to Zhongxian. Throughout the journey, he had been wondering what the purpose of setting up the lava and the field of lightning was. If it was to fend off the otherworldly demonic tribe, it didn't make sense why Master's teachers were impeded by them as well. Looking back, it seemed like everything was for the purpose of tempering the soul so as to make it sufficiently resilient to overcome the soul ordeal. Tzzzzzz. As the lightning energy raged within Zhongxian's body, his soul shattered into fragments before reforming once more. It was fortunate that the process was occurring within his body, or else his fragmented soul would have long dissipated in the world. Under the intense pain from the rampage of the lightning energy, Zhongxian felt his consciousness slowly growing hazy. He hadn't expected becoming a celestial saint to be easy, but he didn't think that it would be so frightening either. That kind of intense pain left him feeling as if every inch of his soul was being slowly cut apart before being sewed back together. Endure. I must endure it. Since Kongsha was able to do it, why can't I? Zhongxian thought as he clenched his jaws tightly in determination. Kongsha was mortal just like any of them. If Kongsha could clear the trial, why couldn't he? After all the effort he had put into cultivating the Saint Ascension decipher, he would be letting himself down if he couldn't even endure this much pain. Jeji. With the further reaffirmation of his resolution, even though the lightning energy coursing through his body was still as painful as ever, it didn't seem as insurmountable and fearsome as before anymore. It looks like he has cleared the soul ordeal. Upon seeing this sight, Luo Ruoxin heaved a sigh of relief. In the next moment, however, she frowned worriedly once more and said, "The body ordeal is a trial which assesses not only one's physical body but one's grasp over zhenqi and cultivation as well. Hopefully, nothing goes wrong there. As the body ordeal consisted of more aspects, it would be more difficult to overcome it than the previous soul ordeal, and the cultivator would be put through a greater deal of suffering as well. The lightning streak in the soul ordeal was fearsome, but as long as the cultivator's soul remained within his body, he wouldn't be in too much danger as long as he didn't succumb to the pain. However, the same couldn't be said about the body ordeal. If the cultivator's body were to be lacking in the slightest, he could very well be reduced to ashes on the spot. Catcher. After a long moment of gathering energy, the second streak of lightning finally burst forth. It was much thicker than the first streak of lightning, roughly the size of the trunk of an ancient tree. It descended to the ground with a force which seemed as if it could tear even the Saint Ascension platform into shreds as well. You might be able to call forth the lightning ordeal, but do you think that I will allow you to become a celestial saint that easily? At this moment, the Skyleaf King had finally shaken free from Wu Shi and the others' encirclement. Upon seeing that Zhongxian had successfully overcome the soul ordeal, his face turned livid. Raising his palm, he sent a powerful strike right towards Zhongxian. Chapter 1084. I am a really good teacher. Huala. The spiritual energy from the surroundings converged together to form a massive palm print, which was then blasted toward Zhongxian with astounding force. If he were struck by the palm strike, there was no doubt that he would die there and then. Skyleaf King, your opponent is me. Alarmed, Wu Shi and guild leader Han hurriedly rushed forward to defend Zhongxian from the palm strike. Not expecting there to be such an abrupt twist in events, Luo Ruoxin's face darkened as she shouted hurriedly, "Don't rush over." However, it was already too late. Wu Shi and guild leader Han had already stepped into the perimeter of the lightning ordeal. Pumping their zhenqi furiously, they were able to barely deflect the powerful palm strike that the Skyleaf King had sent over. However, in the next moment, a deep rumbling sounded from above, and the dark clouds abruptly expended more than twofold. An even more astonishing amount of lightning energy was gathering within the dark clouds, preparing to launch a lethal strike upon its target. Upon seeing that sight, Zhong Yinqiu's face paled. What happened? Why would there suddenly be a rise in the difficulty of the lightning ordeal? The previous streak of lightning was already something that even Zhong Xian could hardly withstand, so if it were to grow stronger, the Saint Ascension ordeal alters its difficulty according to the strength of the cultivator. As Wu Shi and guild leader Han stepped into the vicinity of the lightning ordeal mistakenly thought that Zhongshe has achieved a breakthrough, so it's sending down an even stronger streak of lightning for him to deal with, Luo Ruoxin explained with a pale face. What should we do then? Zhong Yinqiu's body shook in shock. There's nothing we can do, we can't interfere in the matter. Luo Ruoxin gritted her teeth. The more we try to help, the more formidable the lightning ordeal that Zhongshe will be put through. Catcher. Before she could finish her words, the black clouds finally finished charging up, and the lightning grew 2 times larger in the blink of an eye. Hong Long. From the first streak of lightning, Zhong Xian's entire body was already charred black. With the descent of the second streak of lightning, he felt as if a force was tearing his entire body apart. Pu. Fresh blood burst forth from his mouth as his veins ruptured from the lightning energy rampaging through his body. In the blink of an eye, his entire body was dyed crimson. Quintuple incandescence golden body. Muttering softly, the insides of Zhong Xian's body began glowing brilliantly as he drove the quintuple incandescence golden body to its very limits. The second streak of lightning was the body ordeal, so he only had his strongest physical body cultivation technique to rely on to fend off the lightning. Catcher, catcher, catcher. Under the relentless assault of the lightning from above, layer after layer of radiance shimmering around him broke one after another. As if his body was made of ceramic, cracks began appearing on his skin, and blood flowed profusely out of those cracks. How could the lightning be so powerful? Zhong Xian exclaimed within his heart. Even though the previous soul ordeal was unbearable, it had not been beyond his limits. On the other hand, the body ordeal he was going through was simply too powerful. Despite having cultivated his quintuple incandescence golden body to its pinnacle, facing the lightning, he felt like an egg being smashed by a hammer. There was no way he could win at this rate. Jeji. The cracks on his body grew larger and more numerous, and the lightning energy engulfed his entirety. In that moment, Zhong Xian felt as if his head and 4 limbs were torn apart by 5 horses heading in different directions. It's not just 5 horses. It's 100 of them, 1,000, 10,000. The lightning energy felt like 10,000 horses tugging every part of his body. It was as if it would not rest until he was reduced to ashes. I can't hold on any longer. The zhanqi in his body swiftly flowed to fend off the lightning energy, and it managed to fend off the devastating lightning energy for 9 whole breaths. However, on the 10th breath, he finally came to the limit of his strength, and the lightning energy broke through the defenses of his zhanqi. Even though he cultivated the peerless Heaven's Path divine art, the lightning ordeal he was currently going through exceeded his limits. He could not hold on any longer. This won't do. If this continues, I will surely die. So what if you are a lightning ordeal? I don't believe that you don't have flaws. Gritting his teeth, Zhong Xian turned a cold gaze toward the dark clouds in the sky. You might be a powerful force of nature, but nothing in this world is perfect. As long as you have flaws, I will be able to exploit them to tide me through this crisis. With a glance, a book materialized in the library of Heaven's Path. Zhong Xian quickly flipped it open. Hula. A series of words appeared in his head. The second phase of the Saint Ascension ordeal, body ordeal. Through gathering the power of lightning, it devastates the cultivator's physical body and zhanqi through the destructive might harnessed within it. Flaws. Number 1. The nature of the lightning makes it highly destructive against material beings, but it inflicts minimal damage on immaterial beings like souls. It is considered a physical attack. Zhong Xian's eyes lit up. It inflicts minimal damage on souls. His soul was still weakened from the previous soul ordeal. If the lightning within the body ordeal was ineffective against his soul, he could very well absorb it with his soul. Come out, my soul. With a roar, his soul swiftly slipped through his glabella, and opening his mouth wide, he devoured the lightning that was still descending from the heavens. Due to the overwhelming radiance of the lightning, no one saw his soul. They merely thought that he had used a secret art of some sort. TZZZZZZZZZZZZZ. As if a potent tonic, the devoured lightning was swiftly processed into soul energy, enlarging his soul once more. When the lightning coursed through Zhongshen's body and exploded, it caused his body to be inflated to its limit, seemingly threatening to burst it apart. However, when it came to his soul, while it had similar effects, all it had done to its soul was only to make it slightly more condensed. That was not much of a threat at all. Before long, his soul was finally done absorbing the energy harnessed within the second streak of lightning, and his soul reverted back to its initial size of 10 meters. While the quantity of his soul energy had increased, its purity did not take a dip at all. If anything, it seemed to be even more fearsome than before. Does this mean that I have cleared the second phase of the Saint Ascension ordeal? Swiftly returning his soul back to his body, Zhongshen looked up and saw that the second streak of lightning swiftly weakening before eventually clearing altogether, and he heaved a huge sigh of relief. It was fortunate that he had swiftly analyzed the flaws of the body ordeal's lightning with the Library of Heaven's Path, or else his body might have succumbed to it and turned into meat paste. Hong long long. With the conclusion of the second streak of lightning, thunder began rumbling in the dark clouds above once more as the third streak of lightning threatened to fall. This time, the rumbling was clearly much louder, and the sheer size of the lightning spanned a diameter of a meter. It was as if it was determined to tear Zhongshen apart. Catcher! It finally descended down into the world. Die! In that moment, the Skyleaf King flicked his finger toward Zhongshen, and a surge of sword chi flew over. Upon seeing that Zhongshen had managed to clear the second phase of the Saint Ascension ordeal, he felt deeply threatened. Thus, he intended to kill Zhongshen once and for all before the final streak of lightning descended. Otherwise, if the humans were to usher in another celestial saint, that could very well become a catastrophe for the otherworldly demonic tribe. As such, even though it was only a single flick of the finger, that surge of sword chi actually harnessed the full strength of his body. Luo Ruoxin's eyes narrowed upon seeing that attack. She began to move forward to protect Zhongshen, but before she could do so, a figure suddenly appeared right before her. Poochie. That sword chi tore a huge hole through the figure, but it was eventually still stopped before it could reach Zhongshen. Upon seeing that sight, Luo Ruoxin heaved a sigh of relief and stopped. The figure was none other than Zhongshen's clone. The Skyleaf King had provoked them far too many times that even someone as composed as the clone could not hold himself back anymore. How dare you attack my main body? You must be tired of living. With a furious roar, the aura of Zhongshen's clone's body surged furiously, and with a hoo, he leaped right up to the Skyleaf King in the air. You! Not expecting the other party to charge right up to him without any fear for his life, the Skyleaf King was stunned for a moment before sending a palm strike downward. Catcher! Struck by the palm strike, Zhongshen's clone was reduced to a pancake once more. Nevertheless, it did not erode his fighting will in the least. He continued to dash forward furiously despite the unseemly form he was in, determined to bring down the Skyleaf King. Sla. The next moment, a ferocious might struck the Skyleaf King, causing his primordial spirit to dissipate slightly. Damn it! Not expecting the other party to risk his life to launch such desperate attacks against him, the Skyleaf King's face turned livid with rage. Honestly speaking, he was getting vexed at dealing with the fellow before him. It was as if the fellow's body was indestructible. No matter what kind of attacks he launched against the fellow, the latter would always be able to morph back into his original shape a moment later and continue launching frenzied attacks against him. He truly had no idea how he should deal with such an opponent. No, this won't do. It's pointless for me to engage them in conflict. As long as I can fuse the map and the sphere together, I will be able to gain complete control over the Qiuwu Palace. By then, even if Zhongshen successfully becomes a celestial saint, he will still be trapped in my grasp, the Skyleaf King thought as he dodged the clone's attack. As a primordial spirit, he dared not approach Zhongshen in close quarters due to the overwhelming lightning energy that had gathered around him, so he had been trying to launch long-range attacks instead. However, It had not been too effective as the others had been trying their best to intercept his attacks. Not to mention, there was even a seemingly indestructible existence among their ranks that was plaguing him. At this point, he had already realized that it was unlikely that his attacks would reach Zhongxian. Thus, the best option he had was to quickly fuse the map and the sphere together. As long as he could gain complete control over the Qiuwu Palace, he would be able to destroy the group before him easily, even if they did have a celestial saint among them. Scram! With a furious roar, the Skyleaf King knocked the clone away before placing one of his palms on the sphere to forcefully push it against the map, hastening the fusion process. Wang! A loud buzz sounded as the map and the sphere fused with one another. Quick, we have to stop him, Zhong Yinqiu exclaimed in a panic. Wu Shi, guild leader Han, and vice principal Ji Yang dashed over, but before they could come close, they were already knocked back by a flick of the Skyleaf King's hand. As the battle continued, it was apparent that the Skyleaf King held the advantage in terms of stamina. On top of that, the rest of them had sustained considerable injuries over the course of the battle, resulting in a significant decline in their fighting prowess as well. As a result, they found themselves gradually becoming less and less able to stop the Skyleaf King. We are doomed. Seeing that the map and the sphere were close to being fully fused with one another and the shaking of the Qiuwu Palace had stopped as well, Zhong Yinqiu's face paled in horror. It seemed like they had come to the end of the route now. There was nothing they could do at this point anymore. We can only pray that Zhongxia successfully becomes a celestial saint. If he can achieve a breakthrough, we might still stand a chance at reversing the current situation, Zhong Yinqiu muttered as he turned to look at the young man on the Saint Ascension platform. At this moment, Zhongxian was currently facing the final phase of the Saint Ascension ordeal, the Heart Ordeal. This was known to be the hardest trial to overcome, and its dangers far exceeded the previous two. It won't be easy to overcome the Heart Ordeal. Inner demons will sprout within one's mind and assault one's weaknesses. Even the strongest of experts will find it hard to withstand the beguilement of the inner demons. Let's hope that he can endure it, Luo Ruoxin said with a worried frown on her forehead. Zhongxian's successful clearance of the first two trials had done little to alleviate her worries. If Zhongxian were to fail this trial, his consciousness could be wiped out, resulting in his complete death. It was known among cultivators that tempering one's body was easy, but tempering one's mind was difficult. Countless talented cultivators in history had died not in the midst of battle but against the inner demons that had sprouted in their minds during cultivation. Oblivious to the happenings outside, in that very instant, Zhongxian found himself sinking into a unique state of mind. As thick as the lightning streak for the Heart Ordeal was, it did not inflict the slightest pain on his body. Instead, it brought his consciousness into a land of complete darkness. Alone and lost, he found himself unsure of where he had come from and where he should head to in the future. Aimlessly, he walked within the seemingly boundless world of darkness. No directions and no goal, he found himself sinking deeper and deeper into confusion. Where am I? Where do I have to go? Zhongxian thought in a daze. Boom. In the midst of his confusion, a completely dark existence reminiscent of a devil suddenly materialized before his eyes. With an alluring voice, he said, "The cultivation technique that you have cultivated so far is flawed. If you continue down this path, death is the only thing you will find at the end of the road." Flawed. Even in his dazed state, Zhongxian was taken aback by those words. Then, his dazed eyes opened wide on reflex as he replied, "For you to say that the cultivation technique I have cultivated is flawed, it seems like you must have a seriously wrong interpretation of cultivation. How about this? Why don't you become my student, and I will give you some guidance? Don't worry, I am a very good teacher." Inner demon. Chapter 1085. Luo Ruoxin's strength. The inner demon was on the verge of tears. All along, he had been the one to break the mental resilience of others, causing them to doubt themselves so as to create an opening in their state of mind. Using this opening, he would devour the cultivator whole. Yet, against this fellow, he didn't even have the time to finish his words before the other party suddenly offered to become his teacher. That was not playing by the rules. I am an inner demon, all right? I am here to beguile you, not to be beguiled by you. Suppressing the exasperated emotions within him, the inner demon continued speaking with the same alluring voice as before. Cough cough. As I was saying, there is a huge problem in your cultivation at the moment. If that wasn't the case, how could someone as talented as you, the first one to come close to being a celestial saint, possibly be put through so much pain? Just put your trust in me, and you will be able to unleash the full extent of your potential. His voice had a certain quality that drew others into a trance, making him even more fearsome than a demonic tunist. I get what you are saying, but you are the one who is severely misunderstanding something here. The fact that your cultivation technique is different from mine is sufficient evidence to say that you have a huge flaw in your cultivation. If you don't believe me, why don't you try executing a battle technique? I will analyze your situation for you. Waving his hand nonchalantly, Zhongshen's eyes remained perfectly clear, unaffected by the inner demon's beguilement. Had the other party attempted to beguile him using another topic, there was no saying whether he would have fallen for it or not. However, to attempt to make him doubt his cultivation technique. He was a person who could even make ancient sage Qiu Wu's fragmented soul dissipate in embarrassment, so how could a mere inner demon shake his faith in his cultivation technique? Peng. Before Zhongshen finished his words, the inner demon vanished on the spot with a loud pop. Since it was unable to beguile Zhongshen, its raison d'etre had already vanished. As such, it could only vanish into nothing. Before its disappearance, it was actually suffering a mental breakdown within. How in the world did he meet with this kind of a cold and impassive figure? If he had a choice, he would never go there again. Woo! I want to go home. Zhongshen's battle with the inner demon had only lasted a moment. To the eyes of outsiders, they had only seen a thick streak of lightning falling upon Zhongshen. The thick streak of lightning did not seem to have caused any damage to him, he had not spurted blood nor trembled in pain. His body had simply jolted abruptly for a moment before falling still. The next moment, a ray of golden light abruptly burst down from above, and innumerable flowers formed of origin energy fluttered in the air. Luo Ruoxin was dazed for a moment before her eyes widened in shock. This. He has already cleared the heart ordeal? But, how did he do it so quickly? The heart ordeal was the most difficult phase in the Saint Ascension ordeal, so Luo Ruoxin had been clenching her fists tightly in anxiety, worried that he would not be able to overcome it. Yet, who would have thought that just a brief instant after the lightning fell on Zhongshen's body, he cleared the ordeal? This was too shocking. Voila! As the flowers of origin energy fell to the ground, the dark clouds in the sky gradually cleared, and a pillar of pure white radiance descended from the sky. It was as if someone had broken a hole in the sky, causing energy to leak from the heavens. Shrouded amid the white radiance, the injuries that Zhongshen had sustained previously were healing at a visible pace, and his aura was also growing stronger and stronger with every passing second. Upon seeing this sight, Luo Ruoxin heaved a sigh of relief before stepping forward. Shortly after clearing the Saint Ascension ordeal was the period when Zhongshen would be the most vulnerable. Even the slightest damage inflicted in this moment could claim Zhongshen's life. Within this span of time, she would have to make sure to guard him tightly so that no one could lay even a single finger on him. The descent of sacred light. Zhongshe has managed to become a celestial saint. With reddened eyes, Zhong Yinqiu's tightly clenched fists finally opened up as the tension left his body. With this, they would finally be able to defeat the Skyleaf King. However, in that solemn moment, a frenzied laughter sounded. Ha ha ha! I have finally succeeded. Following which, the ground suddenly began trembling intensely. It was not just limited to the Saint Ascension Hall, it felt as if the entire Qiu Wu Palace was coming to life. The Skyleaf King raised his hand, and a map gradually floated toward him. In that moment, everyone suddenly felt a restraint acting upon them, as if they were going to be trapped within the painted world once more. It's over. In this moment, everyone's heart turned cold. Zhongshen had managed to clear the Saint Ascension ordeal, but he still required some time before he could become a celestial saint. If the Skyleaf King managed to escape from the Saint Ascension Hall, their plan to defeat him would end in failure. Instead, trapped within the painting, they would become easy prey that the Skyleaf King could pick on at his whim. However, They had already expended all of their junqi in the previous fight, and they were unable to stop the Skyleaf King anymore. Just a step away from success, who would have thought that they would be outdone at this critical moment? Ha ha ha, it's my victory. What celestial master teacher or celestial saint, it makes no difference at all. You will only end up dying at my hands like the other ants. Having succeeded in gaining possession of the Qiu Wu Palace, the Skyleaf King could no longer hold back the agitation in his heart. With a furious roar, he turned his sight toward the crowd. They had humiliated him again and again over the past few days, and he had finally found an opportunity to return the favor. Boom! Raising his palm, he sent a powerful palm strike toward the young man seated on the Saint Ascension platform, Zhongxian. That was the fellow whom he harbored the greatest hatred towards. Not only did he attempt to steal something from his living quarters, he even had his ally destroy his physical body. No matter what, the Skyleaf King was determined to end his life right there and right then. Hoo-la! There wasn't anything extraordinary about the strength of the palm, but for some reason, it was able to tear through even space itself, opening up a black rift in its trajectory. Gaining possession of the Qiu Wu Palace was equivalent to becoming the new master of the folded space. In other words, the Skyleaf King wielded absolute authority over the ancient domain. Within this space, even if his opponent possessed far greater strength than him, he would still be able to crush the other party easily. Damn it! With a furious bellow, Zhongxian's clone rushed forward to stop the palm strike. However, upon contact with the black rift, he was immediately ripped in two before falling back to the ground. An ability that could even sever space was far beyond what Zhongxian's clone could deal with at the moment, even after his abilities were augmented from absorbing the entire lightning elemental orb. It's over. Seeing how powerful the Skyleaf King's attack was, everyone felt their heart turning cold in despair. Who would have thought that the only celestial saint after Kong Shi would actually die in such a manner? Just as everyone thought that it was Zhongxian's end, the young lady who had been standing guard beside the Saint Ascension platform all this while, Luo Ruoxin, suddenly raised her gaze to look at the Skyleaf King with a frown of displeasure on her face. Humph! She flicked her hand lightly. Catcher! The incomparably powerful palm strike suddenly stopped in midair before dissipating entirely. In the following moment, the Skyleaf King suddenly found his primordial spirit being completely immobilized in midair, as if an ancient insect trapped within a fossil. Even the gleeful look from before had frozen on his face. Unable to believe what was happening, the Skyleaf King roared fearfully, "How can this be possible? Why you? Who the hell are you?" He was not too sure how powerful he had become after gaining control over the Qiu Wu Palace, but one thing was for certain: even a Saint Seven Dan cultivator would have been killed before the palm strike he had launched earlier. Yet, with a casual flick of her hand, the young lady had actually dissipated his attack and sealed his movements completely. Just how powerful was she? If she was so powerful, why hadn't she made a move from the very start? As long as I am here, none of you will lay a finger on him. Completely disregarding the Skyleaf King, Luo Ruoxin placed her hands behind her back and made a cold declaration before turning back to Zhongxian once more, perfectly composed. The rest of you can fight to your deaths all you wish, but I will not allow a single one of you to hurt him. The faces of Wu Shi and the others paled upon witnessing that scene. They had traveled through the ancient domain with the young lady, and not once had they noticed anything extraordinary about her. Who would have thought that she was actually such a powerful expert? It was truly bewildering. Can you see through her cultivation? Guild leader Han asked Wu Shi discreetly. With a bitter look on his face, Wu Shi shook his head. With his strength and eye of discernment, he was actually unable to measure the depth of the strength of the person standing before him. In other words, the other party was much, much stronger than him, achieving a level that was beyond his understanding. But if she possesses such powerful strength, why didn't she save us back at the Celestial Palace? Why did she watch nonchalantly as we lost so many friends? Guild leader Han gritted his teeth in indignation. To an expert of her caliber, our existences might very well mean nothing at all. Wu Shi sighed deeply. Perhaps, in the very first place, the reason she chose to come to the ancient domain was Principal Zhong. Even though he had not had much interaction with the young lady, He could tell through the nonchalant eyes of hers that she was not one who concerned herself deeply with those around her, much like an observer watching a commotion impassively. It was only in affairs regarding Principal Zhong that the air of nonchalance around her would be broken temporarily. How could a person like that possibly do something excessive as to save them? Besides, the Celestial Palace was intended to be one of the trials set by ancient sage Qiu Wu. If she had made a move then, there might have been unforeseen circumstances. This guild leader Han was rendered speechless. Indeed. As a cultivator advanced their cultivation and comprehended the essence of the world, life and death would gradually unravel before their eyes as an inevitable state of life. It was simply a natural cycle of the world. Life was not something to be celebrated, and death was not something to grieve over either. Considering how Luo Ruoxin did not owe anything to them, she had no reason to interfere and save them either. Otherwise, she might end up finding herself being restrained by the rules of the world. The higher one's cultivation became, the more fearful one would be of the heavens. Besides, it's not like she hasn't done anything at all. She was the one who had been dropping us hints all along, and due to that, Jiang Yuan even accused her of being the Skyleaf King, Wu Shi said. After a long moment of hesitation, guild leader Han finally nodded in response. You're right. While Luo Ruoxin had not helped them against the otherworldly demons, her advice had played a crucial role in helping them through the ancient domain. If not for her, they would not have been able to bypass the black sand of oblivion or escape from the Celestial Palace back then. Upon understanding all of that, guild leader Han was finally able to let go of some of the frustration he felt within. Glancing at the completely immobile Skyleaf King, he could not help but ask curiously, to be able to seal the movements of the Skyleaf King so easily, how powerful do you think she is? I think that she could very well be. At this point, Wu Shi's face turned extremely grim. A 9-star master teacher. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,